The rain had begun at dawn, a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the cobblestones of Mayfair slick and grey. Lord Adrian Harcourt, 5th Earl of Ashford, stood at the window of his study, watching the water collect in rivulets along the glass. He held a tumbler of brandy, though it was barely past 9 in the morning. A habit he had acquired in recent months, one he told himself was merely practical, a ward against the damp that seemed to settle in his bones. He was 32 years old, tall, and broad-shouldered, with the kind of aristocratic handsomeness that had once made mothers of marriageable daughters scheme and flutter. Dark hair, grey eyes the colour of winter storms, a jaw that spoke of centuries of breeding and privilege. But there was something else now, something the gossips whispered about in drawing rooms, a coldness, a distance, as though some essential warmth had been extinguished. "My lord, Miss Eleanor Ashworth has arrived." Adrian did not turn immediately. He knew she would come. She always came. Every Tuesday and Friday morning for the past 4 years, Eleanor had arrived at Ashford House to assist him with his correspondence, his charitable endeavours, the endless administrative burden of maintaining 3 estates, a seat in Parliament, and the social obligations that came with his title. She was efficient, intelligent, and utterly indispensable. She was also the daughter of his late mother's dearest friend, a woman of respectable but modest circumstances, whose presence in his household had long since ceased to raise eyebrows among the town. "Show her in," he said quietly, and drained the brandy. Eleanor entered as she always did, without fanfare, without presumption. She wore a simple day dress of pale grey, the modest collar buttoned to her throat, her chestnut hair arranged in a neat chignon that revealed the graceful line of her neck. She carried a leather folio under one arm and moved with the quiet competence of someone who knew her place perfectly and had long ago made peace with it. "Good morning, my lord," she said, her voice steady and pleasant. She did not smile exactly, but there was a warmth in her expression, a familiarity born of years. "I trust you are well." "Well enough," Adrian replied, returning to his desk. He gestured toward the chair opposite. "Please, sit. There are several matters requiring attention." And so they began, as they had hundreds of times before. Eleanor opened her folio, withdrew a stack of correspondence, and began to read aloud. A request from the vicar at Ashford Village regarding repairs to the church roof, an invitation to dine with Lord Pemberton, a letter from his steward in Derbyshire concerning a dispute over grazing rights. She spoke clearly, without embellishment, pausing occasionally to offer her opinion when he requested it. Adrian listened, made decisions, dictated responses. It was a ritual, comfortable and predictable. And yet today something felt different. He found himself watching her more closely than usual, noting the way her fingers moved across the pages, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. She had delicate hands, he realized. Strange that he had never particularly noticed before. "My lord?" He blinked, pulled from his distraction. "Forgive me, you were saying?" Eleanor's expression remained patient, though something flickered in her eyes. Concern, perhaps, or simply curiosity. "I was asking whether you wished to attend Lady Hartwell's musicale next Thursday. She has written again, rather insistently." "No," Adrian said flatly. "Send my regrets." "My lord, you have declined the last 4 invitations from Lady Hartwell. She is a woman of considerable influence, and I am not interested in Lady Hartwell's influence, nor in her interminable musicales where young ladies torture Italian arias beyond recognition." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips, quickly suppressed. "As you wish, my lord." They continued working through the correspondence, but Adrian found his concentration fracturing. He watched Eleanor as she wrote, her penmanship elegant and precise. 4 years. For 4 years, she had sat in this chair, in this room, managing the chaos of his life with grace and intelligence. She asked nothing of him. She expected nothing. She was simply there, constant, reliable. Why had he never truly seen her before? The thought disturbed him, and he pushed it away. When the clock chimed noon, Eleanor began gathering her papers. "I believe that concludes the morning's business, my lord, unless there is something else you require." "No," Adrian said, then hesitated. "Eleanor." She looked up, surprise evident on her face. He rarely used her Christian name, preferring the formality of Miss Ashworth. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling awkward in his mouth, "for your assistance. I realize I do not express my appreciation as often as I should." For a moment, something vulnerable passed across her features, pleasure perhaps, or pain, he could not tell. Then she lowered her eyes. "It is my privilege to serve, my lord. Your mother was exceedingly kind to my family. I am honored to be of use to you." She curtsied, a slight, graceful movement, and left the room. Adrian sat alone in the sudden silence, staring at the empty chair across from him. His mother. Of course. Eleanor's presence in his life was an obligation, a debt of honor. She performed her duties because she had no alternative, because her circumstances required it. The realization should have been obvious, yet it struck him with unexpected force. He rose and returned to the window. The rain had intensified, hammering against the glass with rhythmic insistence. Somewhere in the grey London afternoon, Eleanor would be making her way home to the modest lodgings she shared with her aging father, a retired clergyman of limited means. She would prepare their evening meal, perhaps read to him from the newspaper, tend to whatever domestic responsibilities awaited her. And then on Friday she would return here to this room, and the ritual would begin again. For 4 years this pattern had held. 4 years during which Adrian had barely looked at her, barely acknowledged her as anything more than a useful tool, an extension of his household machinery. 4 years during which she had stood beside him, managed his affairs, anticipated his needs, asked nothing in return. Why did that suddenly feel unbearable? Adrian turned from the window, seeking distraction. He had correspondence of his own to attend to, estate matters, parliamentary business. But the unease remained, a low thrum beneath his thoughts. That evening, as he dressed for dinner at his club, he found himself remembering the way Eleanor's eyes had met his when he thanked her. Dark brown eyes, warm and intelligent, holding depths he had never bothered to explore. He had been so certain of his world, of his place in it. He was the Earl of Ashford, master of vast estates, descendant of men who had shaped England's history. He moved through society with the confidence of inherited power, never questioning, never doubting. Women pursued him for his title and fortune. Men sought his favor for influence and connection. It was the natural order of things. But Eleanor pursued nothing. She simply appeared, week after week, year after year, offering her quiet competence without calculation or expectation. In a world of artifice and ambition, she was genuine. In a society obsessed with advancement and display, she was content with invisibility. Or was she content? How would he know? He had never asked. Adrian arrived at White's in a peculiar mood, distracted and irritable. His friends noticed immediately. "Ashford, you look as though you've swallowed something disagreeable," remarked Lord Thornbury, gesturing with his wineglass. "Woman trouble?" "No," Adrian said shortly. "Nothing of the sort." "Then why the long face? Come, man, have a drink. Tell me you've at least been pursuing that delightful little actress at Covent Garden. What was her name? Catherine? Caroline?" "I have no interest in actresses." Thornbury laughed, a sharp, braying sound. "Good God, Ashford, when did you become so dreadfully dull? You used to enjoy life. Now you're like some Gothic hero, brooding in your ancestral pile. It's most tiresome." Adrian said nothing. Thornbury was right, in a way. He had withdrawn from the pleasures that once occupied him, the mistresses, the gambling, the reckless entertainments. Not from virtue, but from a kind of creeping numbness, a sense that none of it mattered. The women blurred together, interchangeable and ultimately disappointing. The games bored him. The conversations irritated him with their superficiality. When had he become so isolated? When had the walls grown so high? He thought again of Eleanor, her quiet presence, her steady gaze. There was no performance with her, no pretense. She did not flirt or manipulate or scheme. She was simply herself, offering her competence and her kindness without expectation of reward. "Ashford," Thornbury was looking at him with concern now. "Are you quite all right?" "Yes," Adrian lied. "Perfectly well." But he was not well. Something had shifted. Some tectonic plate beneath the surface of his carefully constructed life. He felt it in the tightness of his chest, the restlessness that made him want to stride from the Room, from the club, from the confines of this existence that suddenly felt suffocating. That night, lying awake in his vast empty bed, Adrian allowed himself to think clearly about what he had been avoiding all day. Eleanor Ashworth was not simply his assistant. She was a woman, a flesh and blood woman with thoughts and feelings and desires of her own. For 4 years, she had organized his life, anticipated his needs, stood patiently beside him through every crisis and triumph. And he had treated her as furniture, as a fixture, barely more substantial than the desk she sat behind. The shame of it burned. He remembered a moment, perhaps 2 years ago. It came back to him with sudden clarity. He had received news that his steward in Derbyshire had died unexpectedly, a good man who had served his family for 30 years. Adrian had felt the loss keenly, but propriety demanded restraint. He had stood in this very study, reading and rereading the letter, when Eleanor had entered for their usual appointment. She had seen something in his face, though he thought he had concealed it well. "My lord," she had said softly. "What has happened?" he had told her, his voice carefully controlled. And Eleanor had risen from her chair, walked to where he stood, and placed her hand gently on his arm. Just that, a simple touch, lasting no more than a moment. But in that gesture had been genuine sympathy, human warmth, a wordless acknowledgement of grief. "I am so very sorry," she had said. "Mr. Thomas was a good man. You will miss him greatly." She had not offered empty platitudes about God's will or the necessity of bearing up. She had simply recognized his pain and honored it. Then she had returned to her chair and quietly helped him compose the necessary letters, her presence a steady anchor through the afternoon. He had forgotten that moment until now, or rather, he had not forgotten. He had filed it away in some distant corner of his mind, not recognizing its significance. But it meant something. It meant she saw him, truly saw him, not as a title or a position, but as a man capable of feeling loss. When had anyone else done that? Adrian rose from bed, unable to rest. He pulled on his dressing gown and went downstairs to his study. The house was dark and silent, the servants long retired. He lit a lamp and stood before his desk, looking at the papers arranged in Eleanor's neat stacks, waiting for Friday's review. On impulse, he opened the ledger where she recorded his appointments and obligations. Page after page in her precise hand, a record of his life. Every meeting, every engagement, every responsibility faithfully documented. And in the margins, occasional small notes. Remind Lord A of his mother's birthday. Ensure violets are sent to Lady Hartwell as condolence. Lord A prefers morning appointments when Parliament is in session. These tiny observations, this careful attention to his preferences and needs, it spoke of something more than mere duty. It spoke of caring. Adrian closed the ledger slowly, his hands trembling slightly. What had he done? For 4 years, Eleanor Ashworth had stood beside him, offering her intelligence and her kindness and her loyalty, and he had accepted it all as his due, never once considering what it might cost her, what she might feel, what she might hope for. The clock struck 3 in the morning. Through the window, the rain continued its assault on London, relentless and cold, and Adrian Harcourt, 5th Earl of Ashford, a man who prided himself on control and certainty, felt the first tremors of something he had not experienced in years: fear. Friday arrived grey and bitter, the kind of morning that made London seem a city of ghosts. Adrian had barely slept, his mind circling endlessly around thoughts of Eleanor, thoughts he had successfully suppressed for 4 years, suddenly demanding attention with uncomfortable urgency. He dressed with unusual care, selecting a waistcoat of deep blue rather than his customary black. His valet, the long-suffering Henderson, noted the choice with raised eyebrows but wisely made no comment. Adrian found himself pacing the study, waiting for Eleanor's arrival with an anticipation that felt absurdly adolescent. When she entered precisely at 9 o'clock, he was standing by the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantelpiece, in what he hoped appeared casual rather than anxious. "Good morning, my lord," Eleanor said. Moving toward her customary chair, she wore dark blue today, a color that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and Adrian wondered if she had always dressed this well, or if he was simply noticing for the first time. "Good morning, Miss Ashworth." The formality felt wrong suddenly, a barrier he wished to breach. "I trust you are well?" "Quite well, thank you, my lord." She opened her folio with practiced efficiency. "Shall we begin?" "There is rather a lot today, I'm afraid. The correspondence has accumulated." But Adrian could not concentrate on correspondence. He found himself watching her face as she read, noting the delicate arch of her brows, the way her lips moved slightly as she silently reviewed each letter before reading aloud. How had he sat across from this woman hundreds of times and never truly looked at her? "My lord?" He realized he had missed something entirely. "I apologize. My mind wandered." Eleanor's expression softened with concern. "Are you unwell? You seem distracted. If you would prefer to postpone—" "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "No, I am perfectly well. Please continue." But he was not well. He was troubled, unsettled, haunted by questions that had no business occupying his thoughts. What did Eleanor think during these long hours in his presence? Did she find the work tedious? Did she resent the necessity that bound her to his service? Did she ever look at him and see anything beyond an obligation? The morning proceeded in fits and starts, Adrian's attention wandering, despite his best efforts. Finally, Eleanor set down her pen and looked at him directly, her gaze steady and searching. "My lord, forgive my impertinence, but something is clearly troubling you. If I have done something to displease—" "No." The word came out more forcefully than intended. "No, Eleanor, Miss Ashworth, you have done nothing wrong. Your work is, as always, exemplary." "Then what troubles you?" The question was simple, her tone genuinely concerned, and Adrian found himself confronted with a choice. He could deflect, dismiss, retreat behind the walls of aristocratic reserve, or he could be honest, at least partially. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "about how long you have been in my employ. 4 years, is it not?" 4 years and 7 months, my lord." The precision of her answer struck him. She had counted. "And in all that time, I realize I know very little about you beyond your considerable competence with correspondence and administration." Something flickered across Eleanor's face, surprise perhaps, or wariness. "There is little enough to know, my lord. I am not a person of particular interest." "I disagree." The words emerged before he could think better of them. "Anyone who has managed my affairs with such grace and intelligence for over 4 years must possess qualities worthy of interest." Eleanor's hands, resting on the folio, tightened almost imperceptibly. When she spoke, her voice remained carefully neutral. "You are very kind, my lord." "I am not being kind. I am being observant." Belatedly, perhaps, but observant nonetheless. Adrian left the fireplace and moved closer to his desk, though he did not sit. "Tell me, Miss Ashworth, why did you take this position? I know the connection through my mother, but surely there were other alternatives. A woman of your education might have secured a position as a governess, perhaps, or a companion to some elderly lady of quality." For a long moment, Eleanor did not answer. Her gaze dropped to her hands, and Adrian saw the conflict in her expression, the desire to remain properly distant, warring with something else, something he could not quite identify. "My father's health was failing," she said finally. "He needed care, and the remedies the physicians prescribed were costly. A governess position would have required me to live in the household of my employer, leaving Papa alone. A companion's position would have necessitated travel. This arrangement allowed me to remain in London, to care for him while earning sufficient funds for his medical needs." She paused, then added softly, "Your mother's kindness in securing this position likely saved my father's life, my lord. I do not say that lightly." The explanation was practical, unemotional, but Adrian heard what lay beneath it: love, sacrifice, the kind of fierce devotion that transcended self-interest. Eleanor had spent 4 years in a position that was neither fish nor fowl, belonging fully to neither the servant class nor society, existing in that uncomfortable liminal space between. She had done it for her father, asking nothing for herself. "Your father is better now, I hope." "Considerably improved, thank you for asking, though he will never regain his full strength. And yet you remain in my employ." The observation hung between them, a question unasked. Eleanor raised her eyes to meet his, and in that moment, Adrian saw something that made his breath catch. A flash of pain, quickly suppressed, a vulnerability that she immediately tried to conceal. The position provides security, my lord. It would be foolish to abandon it without cause. Security. Yes, of course. What else could bind her here? Certainly not affection for an employer who barely acknowledged her existence beyond her usefulness. Adrian felt shame burn through him again, sharp and uncomfortable. Of course, he managed. That is sensible. They worked in silence for a while after that, the earlier ease between them, fractured by Adrian's clumsy probing. But he could not stop himself from wanting to know more, from trying to piece together the woman who had been invisible to him for so long. Your father was a clergyman, he said eventually, apropos of nothing. Where was his living? Eleanor looked up, clearly puzzled by his sudden interest. In Hertfordshire, my lord, a small parish near St. Albans. When his health failed, the bishop found a replacement, and we were obliged to vacate the rectory. That must have been difficult, leaving your home. It was the life we knew, Eleanor said simply. Papa had served that parish for 30 years. The parishioners were like family. But such is the nature of church livings. One does not own them. One merely occupies them through service. There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. But Adrian heard the loss nonetheless. She had been uprooted, displaced, forced to rebuild her entire existence in a city where she knew few people, all while caring for an invalid father. And through it all she had maintained her dignity, her competence, her quiet strength. You must miss it, he said. The countryside. Sometimes. Eleanor's expression grew distant, touched with memory. I miss the gardens most, I think. Papa had a particular talent for roses. The rectory garden was quite beautiful in summer. Whites and pinks and the most exquisite crimson blooms, and the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings, carrying across the fields. London has its charms, but it is not peaceful. Adrian found himself imagining Eleanor in a country garden, surrounded by roses, her face lifted to the sun. The image was unexpectedly vivid, unexpectedly appealing. She belonged in such a setting, he realized, not trapped in this dim London study, managing the affairs of a man who did not appreciate her. Perhaps you will return one day, he offered, when circumstances permit. Eleanor's smile was sad, knowing. Perhaps, my lord. Though I confess I find it difficult to imagine what circumstances those might be, because she had no fortune, no prospects, no powerful connections beyond his dead mother's charity. Because women like Eleanor, gentlewomen fallen on reduced circumstances, existed in a peculiar purgatory, too educated and refined for menial labor, too impoverished for society, dependent on the goodwill of those who remembered their fathers or pitied their situations. The injustice of it struck Adrian with unexpected force. Eleanor deserved better, better than this half-life of service, better than endless hours in a study managing someone else's existence, better than the prospect of growing old as a paid companion or secretary, her own dreams and desires perpetually deferred. I should like, Adrian said suddenly, to ensure that your service to this household is properly valued. Your salary is more than adequate, my lord, Eleanor interrupted, color rising in her cheeks. Truly, I am grateful for what you already provide. Nevertheless, I believe an increase is warranted, and perhaps you might consider taking on fewer hours. You could come only 3 days a week rather than 4, or... My lord. Eleanor's voice was firmer now, almost sharp. Please, I must ask you to stop. Your kindness is appreciated, but I will not accept charity disguised as employment. What I do here, I do because I am capable of doing it well. My salary is fair compensation for my labor. I do not require pity. The word struck him like a slap. Pity. Is that what she thought he felt? Adrian opened his mouth to protest, to explain that his concern arose from something entirely different, but Eleanor was already gathering her papers, her movements quick and agitated. I believe we have finished the urgent correspondence, she said, not meeting his eyes. If you will excuse me, I have promised Papa I would return early today. There is a physician coming to examine him this afternoon. Eleanor. Miss Ashworth, please, I did not mean to offend. You have not offended me, my lord. I am simply tired. "It has been a long week. I shall return on Tuesday as usual." She curtsied, perfunctory and brief, and left the room before Adrian could formulate a response. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and he stood alone in the study, feeling as though he had just made some catastrophic error without quite understanding how. Pity. No, what he felt was not pity. It was something far more complicated, far more dangerous. It was recognition, the sudden disorienting awareness that Eleanor Ashworth was not a convenience or a tool, but a woman of depth and intelligence and quiet strength. A woman who had sacrificed her own happiness to care for her father, who had maintained her dignity in circumstances that would have broken others, who possessed a grace and competence that shamed his own self-absorbed existence. It was the beginning of admiration, and admiration, Adrian knew, was a very small step away from something else entirely. He crossed to the window, watching Eleanor's figure disappear into the street below. She walked quickly, her head bowed against the wind, anonymous among the crowds of London. In moments, she vanished entirely, and Adrian was left with an unfamiliar sensation, the desire to follow, to call her back, to somehow bridge the distance that existed between them. But what could he say? What right did he have to disrupt the careful equilibrium they had? Maintained for 4 years. She had made her position clear. She wanted employment, not charity. She wanted respect, not pity. And what he was beginning to feel toward her was neither of those things. It was something that had no proper place in the relationship between an earl and his secretary, something that could only bring complications and pain. Adrian turned from the window, his jaw tight with frustration. He should let this go. He should return to the comfortable distance he had, maintained, should treat her as he always had, efficiently, impersonally, without allowing his awareness of her to grow into anything more problematic. But even as he formed that resolution, he knew it was already too late. Something had shifted irrevocably. Eleanor Ashworth had emerged from the shadows of his study into the full light of his attention, and Adrian could not force her back into invisibility, no matter how much simpler that would make his life. That evening, alone in his club, nursing brandy and avoiding conversation, Adrian allowed himself to think about the past. Not Eleanor's past, but his own. The history that had made him the man he was. Cold, controlled, incapable of the easy warmth that others seemed to manage effortlessly. Her name had been Catherine. Lady Catherine Ashworth, no relation to Eleanor, though the coincidence of surnames had not escaped his notice. 7 years ago, when Adrian was 25 and newly come into his title after his father's sudden death, Catherine had been the diamond of the season. Beautiful, accomplished, from an impeccable family. He had courted her with all the intensity of young passion, certain that she represented his future. And Catherine had encouraged him, had seemed to return his feelings, had allowed him to believe that she cared for him as a man, not merely as a title. He had been on the verge of proposing, the ring purchased, his heart more open and vulnerable than it had ever been before or since. Then, Lord Pemberton had offered for her. Pemberton, whose title was older, whose fortune was larger, whose estates were more extensive, and Catherine had accepted without hesitation, without even the courtesy of informing Adrian first. He had learned of it at a ball, from the smirking commentary of acquaintances, the humiliation compounded by public exposure. "I am sorry, Lord Ashford," Catherine had said when he confronted her, her beautiful face composed and untroubled. "But surely you understand. Lord Pemberton's offer was superior in every way. One must be practical in these matters. Practical, as though his feelings, his hopes, his opened heart, as though all of that had been merely an item in a ledger, easily outbid by a better offer. Adrian had locked himself away after that, refusing company for months. When he finally emerged, he was changed. The warmth had been excised, replaced by icy control. He took mistresses, but never lovers. He maintained friendships, but allowed no intimacy. He fulfilled his obligations to society, to his estates, to his name. But he withheld himself, his true self, from everyone. It was safer that way. It was simpler. If you gave nothing, nothing could be taken from you. But Eleanor had somehow slipped past his defenses without his noticing. With her quiet presence, her steady competence, her complete lack of calculation or ambition, She had become essential to him in ways he was only now beginning to understand. She asked nothing, and somehow that made him want to give everything. The realization terrified him. Adrian drained his glass and signaled for another. He was being foolish, allowing ancient pain to resurface, allowing new feelings to take root. Eleanor was his employee. The distance between their positions was vast and unbridgeable. Any attempt to alter their relationship would only end in disaster, for both of them, but especially for her. And yet, when he closed his eyes, he saw her face, those warm brown eyes, that gentle expression of concern when she had asked what troubled him. He heard her voice speaking of rose gardens and church bells, speaking of her father with such clear devotion, speaking of her life with neither complaint nor self-pity. She deserved better than this half-existence. She deserved gardens and beauty and freedom from financial anxiety. She deserved to be cherished, not merely employed. But he could not be the one to give her those things. He was too damaged, too closed, too afraid of the vulnerability that caring required. Better to maintain the distance, to keep her safely on the far side of the desk, where his regard for her could remain theoretical rather than dangerous. Even as he made that decision, Adrian knew it was a coward's choice. But cowardice at least was familiar. Cowardice would not expose him to the searing pain of rejection, the humiliation of offering his heart and having it judged insufficient. He would be careful. He would be proper. He would ensure. Eleanor remained exactly where she was. Indispensable, invisible, safe. The brandy burned going down, but it could not warm the cold place in his chest where fear had settled like frost. 3 weeks passed in uncomfortable equilibrium. Eleanor continued to arrive with clockwork regularity, and Adrian continued to wrestle with feelings he could neither express nor fully suppress. Their interactions remained courteous, professional, but something had changed beneath the surface, a tension that thrummed in the silence between sentences, in glances that lasted a fraction too long. Eleanor seemed determined to pretend nothing had shifted. She answered his questions with her usual efficiency, managed his affairs with her customary competence, and maintained the careful distance of employer and employee. But Adrian noticed small things. The way she sometimes paused before speaking, as though weighing her words more carefully than before. The way she no longer lingered after their work was complete, gathering her papers and departing with almost unseemly haste. He had frightened her, he realized. His clumsy attempt at intimacy, his probing questions, his offer of increased salary. All of it had signaled danger, a threat to the careful equilibrium she had constructed around their relationship. She was protecting herself, and he could not blame her, but the distance between them felt suddenly unbearable. It was Lord Thornbury who inadvertently shattered the fragile status quo. Adrian was at White's enduring an afternoon of tedious conversation, when Thornbury appeared at his elbow with the satisfied expression of a man bearing interesting gossip. "Ashford, my dear fellow, I've just had the most intriguing encounter. Do you recall your little secretary, Miss Ashworth?" Adrian's attention snapped into sharp focus, though he kept his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Ashworth assists me with correspondence. What of it?" "Well, I've just met her at the Bellinghams' afternoon." A reception, of all places. Apparently Lady Bellingham was a school friend of Miss Ashworth's mother or some such connection. Quite the surprise to see her in society, I must say. Every muscle in Adrian's body tensed. Miss Ashworth was at the Bellinghams? Indeed. Looking rather lovely too, I must confess. That blue dress brought out her eyes quite marvelously. We had a delightful conversation about Shakespeare. The woman is remarkably well read. Not at all the dried-up spinster one might expect. From a secretary. The casual dismissiveness in Thornbury's tone made Adrian's hands curl into fists. Miss Ashworth is a gentlewoman of excellent family. Her father was a respected clergyman. She is hardly— "Oh, I meant no disrespect," Thornbury said quickly, noting Adrian's expression. "Quite the contrary, I found her charming. In fact, I was considering calling on her. Do you think she would receive me?" The question struck Adrian like a physical blow. Thornbury, calling on Eleanor. Thornbury, whose interest in women was entirely carnal, whose courtships lasted only as long as it took to coax them into his bed. The thought of Eleanor subjected to his shallow attentions, his practiced seductions, was suddenly intolerable. "I hardly think Miss Ashworth would welcome such attention." Adrian said coldly. She is a woman of serious purpose, not some society flirt seeking entertainment. Thornbury raised an eyebrow, his expression sharp with sudden interest. My dear Ashford, one might almost think you object to my interest. Surely you don't have designs on the woman yourself? Don't be absurd. Then why the vehemence? If Miss Ashworth is free to receive callers, and I am free to call, where lies the harm? Thornbury's smile turned sly. Unless, of course, you've been keeping her all to yourself these 4 years and object to competition. There is no competition, Adrian snapped. Miss Ashworth is my employee, nothing more. Then you won't mind if I pursue an acquaintance? Thornbury clapped him on the shoulder, oblivious to Adrian's tension. Excellent. I shall send flowers tomorrow. Women of modest circumstances are always susceptible to a bit of romantic attention. He walked away, leaving Adrian standing rigid with fury. The casual presumption, the careless reduction of Eleanor to just another conquest, it ignited something primitive and fierce in his chest. But more disturbing was Thornbury's observation. Unless you've been keeping her all to yourself. Had he been? In his mind, Eleanor existed solely in the context of his study, his correspondence, his needs. The idea that she had an independent existence, that she moved through society, attended receptions, conversed with men like Thornbury, it had simply never occurred to him. She was his, no, not his. He had no claim on her. But the thought of another man pursuing her, courting her, perhaps winning her affections. Adrian left the club abruptly, ignoring the curious looks that followed him. He needed to think. He needed to understand this surge of possessive fury that had no rational basis, no justification. Eleanor was not his property. She was free to accept the attentions of any man she chose. If Thornbury wished to court her, and if Eleanor welcomed such attention, Adrian had no right to interfere. But the thought of Thornbury's hands on Eleanor, Thornbury's practiced compliments in her ear, Thornbury seducing her with the same careless ease he applied to every woman, it made Adrian feel physically ill. That evening he did something unprecedented. He went to the Bellingham's house, a place he normally avoided with religious zeal, making some excuse about returning a book Lady Bellingham had lent his mother years ago. It was thin pretense, but Lady Bellingham seemed delighted by his unexpected call and immediately drew him into her drawing room, where a dozen guests were gathered for an informal evening of cards and conversation. Eleanor was there. She sat near the window with an elderly gentleman, discussing something with quiet animation. She wore the blue dress Thornbury had mentioned, and Adrian saw with a shock of recognition that Thornbury was right. She looked lovely. Not beautiful in the calculated way of society diamonds, but naturally, genuinely lovely. The lamplight caught the chestnut warmth of her hair, and her smile, as she responded to something her companion said, transformed her face into something luminous. Why had he never seen her smile like that? Adrian realized he was staring and forced himself to look away, engaging in stilted conversation with Lady Bellingham, but his attention remained fixed on Eleanor, tracking her movements, noting who spoke with her, cataloguing every interaction. When a young gentleman brought her tea, Adrian felt an irrational surge of irritation. When she laughed at something he said, Adrian wanted to cross the room and physically remove the man from her presence. This was madness. This was beneath him. And yet he could not stop himself from caring, from watching, from feeling this corrosive jealousy eating away at his composure. Finally, inevitably, Eleanor noticed his presence. Their eyes met across the room, and Adrian saw surprise flash across her features, followed by something more complicated. Confusion, perhaps, or wariness. She excused herself from her companion and approached him, her expression carefully neutral. "My lord," she said quietly, curtsying. "This is unexpected. I did not know you were acquainted with Lady Bellingham." "An old connection through my mother," Adrian said, acutely aware of Lady Bellingham hovering nearby, watching them with undisguised curiosity. "I see you are better acquainted with her than I. Lady Bellingham was exceedingly kind to Mamma before she died. She has maintained the friendship despite our changed circumstances." Eleanor's voice was low, meant only for him. "My lord, I hope my presence here does not discomfort you. Lady Bellingham specifically invited me, and I did not think to ask your permission to accept social engagements outside our working arrangement." The formal phrasing stung, the reminder of the distance between them delivered with perfect courtesy. "You require no permission from me for your private life, Miss Ashworth. I am merely surprised to see you in society." "I am not always in your study, my lord," Eleanor said, and there was the faintest edge to her voice. "I do occasionally venture into the world beyond your correspondence." "Of course, I did not mean to suggest otherwise." They stood in awkward silence, both aware of Lady Bellingham's interested observation. Finally, Eleanor said, "I should return to Mr. Whitmore. We were having a most interesting discussion about agricultural improvements. If you will excuse me, my lord." She curtsied again and walked away, leaving Adrian standing alone, feeling like a fool. Mr. Whitmore, the elderly gentleman, agricultural improvements, such innocent, respectable topics, and yet Adrian had watched that interaction with the jealous intensity of a lover. He left the Bellinghams shortly after, unable to endure watching Eleanor converse so easily with others, unable to approach her himself without revealing the confusion of his feelings. In his carriage, rattling through the London streets, Adrian pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to impose order on the chaos in his mind. He was jealous, absurdly, irrationally jealous of every man who spoke to Eleanor, every smile she directed at someone other than himself. The realization was humiliating, but undeniable. Somewhere in the past weeks, his awareness of her had transformed into something more dangerous, more consuming. He wanted her attention. He wanted her smiles. He wanted her to look at him the way she had looked at Mr. Whitmore, with genuine interest and warmth, rather than the careful neutrality she now maintained in his presence. But more than that, and this was the truly disturbing realization, he wanted her, not as an employee, not as a convenient secretary, but as a woman. He wanted to know her thoughts beyond estate management and correspondence. He wanted to hear her opinions on Shakespeare, on politics, on life. He wanted to see her in that blue dress again, but this time on his arm, attending events as his companion rather than as some peripheral figure in borrowed society. He wanted things he had no right to want, things that could never be. The distance between an earl and a gentlewoman of no fortune was not insurmountable in theory. Such marriages occurred occasionally, but they required the man to set aside pride, to accept the censure of society, to prioritize personal feeling over familial obligation. 7 years ago, Catherine had taught him that feelings were worthless currency in the marriage market, easily devalued by more practical considerations. If Eleanor knew of his interest, and what could he offer her, really? A scandal? The disapproval of his family, who would expect him to make a brilliant match? The whispers that would follow her through every drawing room, marking her as the secretary who had seduced her employer? No, he could offer her nothing but damage. Better to contain these feelings, to lock them away where they could harm neither of them. Better to maintain the distance, to keep their relationship safely professional. And yet, when he arrived home and climbed the stairs to his study, Adrian found himself standing in the doorway looking at Eleanor's chair. The room felt empty without her presence, cold and lifeless. How strange that this space, which had been his private sanctuary for years, now felt incomplete when she was absent. He crossed to his desk and saw a note in her handwriting, left from their last meeting, a simple reminder about an upcoming appointment with his solicitor. But he stood there, holding the paper, looking at the familiar loops and curves of her penmanship, and felt something tighten in his chest. 4 years she had given him, 4 years of loyalty and competence and quiet devotion to her duties, and he had reciprocated with indifference, barely acknowledging her existence beyond her usefulness. Now, when he finally saw her clearly, when he finally recognized her value, now it was too late. She had erected walls between them, protective barriers built from his own prior neglect. And Thornbury would send flowers tomorrow. Thornbury, who possessed the easy charm Adrian lacked, who could make women laugh and feel valued. Thornbury, who saw Eleanor as a pleasant conquest rather than a complicated emotional entanglement. Adrian set down the note and moved to the window. London sprawled below him, thousands of lives unfolding in parallel, most destined never to intersect with his own. Somewhere in that vast city, Eleanor was perhaps sitting with her father, reading to him, tending to his needs. Did she think of this evening? Did she wonder about Adrian's unexpected appearance at the Bellinghams? Did she suspect the turmoil his presence there represented? Or did she think of Thornbury, anticipating his flowers, his courtship? Did she welcome such attention from a man who would offer her freedom from financial worry, who might give her the security and comfort she deserved? The thought was acid, burning through Adrian's chest. He pressed his forehead against the cold window glass and closed his eyes. This was the price of his isolation, his carefully constructed distance. He had kept himself safe from hurt by refusing to care. And now, confronted with the one woman who made him want to breach those walls, he found himself trapped, unable to retreat, unable to advance, suspended in a peculiar agony of his own creation. Tuesday would come. Eleanor would arrive for their appointment, and Adrian would have to sit across from her, pretending he felt nothing beyond professional regard, while inside he burned with jealousy and longing and the terrible recognition of opportunity lost. He had stood beside her for years and never truly seen her. Now she was slipping away, and he had no idea how to reach across the distance that separated them, a distance he himself had created and maintained through 4 years of willful blindness. Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth, a false spring that made London's grey facades seem almost welcoming. Adrian had spent the intervening days in a state of barely suppressed agitation, alternating between rehearsing what he might say to Eleanor and convincing himself to say nothing at all. The flowers Thornbury had promised haunted his imagination. He pictured them arriving at Eleanor's modest lodgings, pictured her pleasure at receiving them, pictured her perhaps placing them in water while her father made approving comments about Lord Thornbury's excellent prospects. By the time 9 o'clock approached, Adrian had worked himself into a state of cold fury directed at no one in particular, and everyone simultaneously. He stood at his desk rather than sitting, his posture rigid, when Eleanor entered. She looked tired, he noted immediately. There were shadows beneath her eyes that had not been there the previous week, and her movements lacked their usual brisk efficiency. She carried her folio as always, but she set it down with less care than was typical, and when she looked at him, her expression was guarded in a way that made his chest tighten with apprehension. "Good morning, my lord," she said quietly. "I trust you are well." "Perfectly well." The words came out more sharply than intended. "And you, Miss Ashworth, you appear fatigued. Papa had a difficult night. The physician believes his condition may be worsening." Her voice remained steady, but Adrian heard the fear beneath it. "Forgive me if I am not at my best this morning." The information should have prompted sympathy, concern, an offer of assistance. Instead, Adrian heard himself say, "Perhaps you have been overtaxing yourself with social engagements, late nights at receptions when you should be resting." Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes widening with surprise, and something that might have been anger. "I beg your pardon. The Bellingham's reception. It seemed a rather frivolous use of time for someone with such pressing responsibilities." The words were cruel, unfair, and Adrian knew it, even as they left his mouth. But some ugly part of him wanted to wound her, wanted to punish her for making him feel this consuming jealousy, this helpless longing. If he could not have her attention through warmth, perhaps he could command it through conflict. Eleanor stood very still, her hands clenched at her sides. When she spoke, her voice was low and controlled, but trembling with suppressed emotion. "My lord, what I do with my private time is my own concern. I fulfilled my obligations here before attending Lady Bellingham's invitation. My personal life does not interfere with my professional duties. Does it not? You appear exhausted. Your attention seems divided. Perhaps you have allowed yourself to become distracted." "Distracted?" Eleanor repeated the word as though tasting something bitter. "By what precisely do you believe I am distracted, my lord?" "By the attentions of gentlemen like Lord Thornbury, perhaps. He mentioned his intention to call on you. I assume he has done so." The silence that followed was terrible. Eleanor stared at him, her expression cycling through shock, hurt, and finally settling into something cold and remote. "I see," she said softly. "You have been discussing me with Lord Thornbury. How enlightening." "I merely—" "No." The word was sharp, cutting through his attempted explanation. "No, my lord, you will hear me now. For 4 years I have served in this household with dedication and discretion. I have never presumed upon our connection, never sought to advance myself through your influence, never asked for anything beyond fair compensation for honest labor. I have maintained every boundary of propriety, have never forgotten my place or yours, and now you dare to question my conduct because I accepted a social invitation from a family friend? Eleanor, I did not mean Miss Ashworth, she corrected icily. You have forfeited the right to my Christian name, my lord. As for Lord Thornbury, yes, he sent flowers. Yes, he called yesterday afternoon, and I received him as I would receive any gentleman who showed me the courtesy of respectful attention. Because unlike some, Lord Thornbury has never treated me as though I were furniture, never looked through me as though I were invisible, never made me feel that my sole value lay in my usefulness to his comfort and convenience. Each word struck like a lash, but Adrian's pride, that cursed, unyielding pride, would not allow him to retreat. Thornbury is not a man of honourable intentions. If you cannot see that, then I am what, my lord? Foolish? Desperate? So starved for masculine attention that I would throw myself at any man who offered a kind word? Eleanor's voice rose, years of suppressed frustration finally breaking through her careful composure. You know nothing of my life, nothing of my struggles, nothing of what I feel or think or hope for. You have never asked. In 4 years you have never once inquired after my well-being beyond the perfunctory courtesies of employer to employee, and now suddenly when another man shows interest, you presume to judge my choices. I am trying to protect you. I do not want your protection. The declaration rang through the study, sharp and final. I do not want your belated concern or your jealous interference or whatever this is that has possessed you these past weeks. I wanted... She stopped abruptly, pressing her fingers to her temples. When she continued, her voice was quieter, but no less fierce. It does not matter what I wanted. I was a fool to think, but that is beside the point now. My lord, I believe it would be best if we terminated this arrangement. The words struck Adrian like a physical blow. What? I cannot continue in this position. The situation has become untenable. I will, of course, remain until you secure a replacement. I owe your mother's memory that much at least. But I will not subject myself to this confusion any longer. Adrian felt panic rise in his throat, sharp and choking. Eleanor, please, you are being irrational. I apologize if I offended you, but surely irrational? Eleanor laughed, a harsh sound without humor. No, my lord. For the first time in 4 years I am thinking clearly. I have allowed this position to trap me, to define me, to consume my life. I have told myself it was duty, obligation, gratitude to your mother. But in truth, I have been hiding here, safe in this study, managing your life because I was too afraid to build one of my own. That is not true. You are invaluable. To your household management, yes. To the smooth operation of your estates and social obligations. But as a person, my lord, as a woman with thoughts and feelings and aspirations beyond correspondence and account ledgers, I have been invisible to you. Worse than invisible, irrelevant. Until suddenly I was not, and now you don't know what to do with that awareness, except lash out and try to control me. Adrian stood frozen, unable to formulate a response. Everything she said was true, devastatingly true, and the accuracy of her observations only made his anger burn hotter. Anger at himself, at his blindness, at the situation he had created through years of careful indifference. What if, he said slowly, dangerously, what if I told you that you are wrong, that you have never been irrelevant to me? Eleanor met his gaze steadily, her brown eyes bright with unshed tears. Then I would say you have a peculiar way of demonstrating regard, my lord. Indifference for 4 years, followed by possessive jealousy the moment another man notices me? That is not regard. That is, I don't know what that is, but it is not what I deserve. And what do you deserve, Miss Ashworth? The question emerged bitter, challenging. I deserve to be seen, Eleanor said simply, to be valued for more than my efficiency, to be treated as though my happiness matters, as though my life has meaning beyond its utility to yours. I deserve, her voice wavered, then strengthened. I deserve what every woman deserves, to be chosen, not merely tolerated, to be wanted, not merely found useful. The declaration hung between them, raw and honest. Adrian felt something crack inside his chest, some final defense against the truth he had been avoiding. She was right. About all of it. He had taken her for granted, had valued her competence while ignoring her humanity, had kept her safely distant until the threat of losing her made him realize what he stood to. Forfeit. And now, confronted with her pain he had caused through his negligence, he did not know how to repair the damage. His pride warred with his longing, his fear of vulnerability struggled against his desire to reach for her. The result was paralysis, silence, an inability to offer the words that might bridge the chasm opening between them. "I see," Eleanor said finally, reading his silence as confirmation. "Then there is nothing more to say. I shall prepare a list of suitable candidates to replace me. Mrs. Thompson's daughter is very capable, and there is also Miss—" "No." The word emerged harsh, commanding. Eleanor paused, her expression wary. "No," Adrian repeated, forcing himself to speak past the fear constricting his throat. "I do not want a replacement. I want—" "Eleanor, please, sit down. Let us speak reasonably about this." "There is nothing reasonable to discuss, my lord. My decision is made." "Then unmake it." Adrian moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. Eleanor took a step back, maintaining the space, and the rejection of that small movement struck him with disproportionate pain. "Eleanor, I am asking you, I am begging you, not to leave. Not like this. Not in anger." "I am not angry," Eleanor said quietly. "I am simply done, my lord. Done pretending this arrangement is sustainable. Done hoping you might someday see me as something more than efficient help. Done waiting for a man who looks through me rather than at me. I see you now." The words burst from him, desperate and unpolished. "I see you, Eleanor. I have been seeing you, and it terrifies me, and I do not know what to do with it except behave badly and push you away, because that is what I do. I push away everything and everyone who might possibly matter, because if I do not allow them close, they cannot hurt me. It is cowardice, and it is contemptible, and I know it. But I am asking you, please do not leave. Not yet. Give me time to learn how to be better, to do better." Eleanor stood very still, her eyes searching his face. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why does it matter whether I stay or go? You said yourself I am merely your employee. What difference does it make who manages your correspondence?" "Because it does matter." Adrian's voice rose, frustration and fear combining into something close to anguish. "Because you matter, damn it. Because somehow, without my noticing until it was too late, you became essential. Not your efficiency or your competence or your bloody excellent penmanship. You, Eleanor Ashworth, the woman who speaks of rose gardens and church bells, the woman who has sacrificed her own happiness to care for her father, the woman who maintains her dignity and grace in circumstances that would embitter others. You matter, and I cannot bear the thought of you leaving, of walking into this study and finding you gone, of living my life without your presence in it." The confession hung between them, more revealing than Adrian had intended. Eleanor's expression softened fractionally, but wariness remained in her eyes. "My lord, you do not know what you are saying. You are panicking because change frightens you, because your comfortable routine is threatened. In a few weeks, with a new secretary, you will forget—" "I will not forget." Adrian took another step forward, and this time Eleanor did not retreat. "Eleanor, I will not forget. How could I? You have been the constant thread through 4 years of my life. You have witnessed my tempers, my doubts, my failures. You have never judged, never faltered in your support. And I have repaid you with negligence and now with possessive jealousy that I have no right to feel. But I cannot pretend anymore. I cannot maintain this fiction that you are merely staff, merely convenient. You are—" He stopped. The words he needed to say caught in his throat. To speak them would be to expose himself completely, to hand her the power to destroy him, as Catherine had done. But if he did not speak them, Eleanor would leave and he would lose her anyway, not through betrayal but through his own cowardice. "You are important to me," he managed finally. "More important than I knew how to acknowledge. And if Lord Thornbury or any other man wishes to court you, that is your right, and I have no claim that would supersede your choice. But before you leave this house, before you accept another man's attentions, I need you to know that you matter. To me, profoundly." Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears now, one escaping to trace down her cheek. "My lord, this is not— You cannot say such things. The distance between us—" is a construct of society's making, not some natural law. I am an earl, you are a gentlewoman. The disparity exists, but it is not insurmountable if we do not allow it to be. And what are you suggesting? Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. What exactly do you imagine could exist between us beyond what we have had these 4 years? The question was fair, deserved, and Adrian found he did not have an answer, not a complete one. He only knew that the thought of Eleanor walking out of his life was unendurable, that the image of her accepting Thornbury's courtship made him want to put his fist through a wall. He only knew that somewhere in the past weeks, awareness had transformed into something perilously close to need. I don't know, he admitted, and the honesty of it seemed to surprise them both. I don't know what I'm suggesting, Eleanor. I only know I'm asking you not to go, not yet. Not until we have had time to understand what this is between us. There is nothing between us, my lord. There cannot be. You are my employer. I am your employee. Any other interpretation would be what? Scandalous, inappropriate? Yes, it would be both those things. But would it be wrong? Eleanor turned away, one hand pressed to her mouth, as though holding back words she dared not speak. When she finally looked at him again, her expression was anguished. My lord, you are not thinking clearly. You are upset because I threatened to leave, because your routine was disrupted. But these feelings you think you have, they are not real. They are proximity and panic, and perhaps loneliness. In time, with distance, you will realize, do not tell me what I feel. Adrian's voice was low, intense. Do not dismiss my regard as though it was some temporary confusion. I am many things, Eleanor. Proud, cold, emotionally stunted from past hurt. But I am not confused about this. I know that I have hurt you through my neglect. I know that I have no right to your forgiveness or your regard. But I also know that if you walk out of this house, if I let you go without fighting for the possibility of something more, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Fighting for what? Eleanor asked, and there was something desperate in her voice now. What could you possibly offer me, my lord? A position as a mistress? The shame and scandal of being the secretary who warmed the Earl's bed? No, the suggestion revolted him. God, no, Eleanor, I would never. You are worth infinitely more than that. Then what? Marriage? She laughed, bitter and pained. You cannot marry me. Your family would disown you, society would ostracize us both. Your political career would be ruined. And I would spend my life wondering if you regretted your choice, if you looked at me and saw the woman who cost you everything. Eleanor? No, my lord, this conversation has gone far enough. You are distraught and I am overwrought, and we are saying things that cannot be unsaid. She drew a shaky breath, visibly gathering her composure. I will leave now. I need time to think, to decide what is best. I will write to you within the week regarding my intentions. Please, Adrian said, and the word was raw, stripped of pride. Please, Eleanor, don't leave like this. But she was already gathering her things. Her movements hurried and uncoordinated. She reached the door before Adrian could formulate another plea, another argument that might make her stay. She paused there, her hand on the doorframe, not looking at him. For what it is worth, my lord, she said quietly. I did see you. All these years I saw you. Every moment of kindness you tried to hide, every struggle you thought you concealed, every instance of generosity you dismissed as mere obligation. I saw all of it. And despite your coldness, despite your distance, despite everything you did to keep the world at arm's length, I made the profound mistake of caring anyway. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, and Adrian stood alone in his study, surrounded by the wreckage of his own pride. The silence was absolute, crushing. He crossed to the window and watched Eleanor emerge onto the street below, watched her walk away with quick, agitated steps that spoke of barely controlled emotion. He had done this. Through his blindness, his possessive jealousy, his inability to express feeling without wrapping it in criticism and control, he had driven away the one person who had truly seen him, truly stood beside him, asking nothing but offering everything. Adrian pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. He had thought himself safe in his isolation, protected by the walls he had built. But safety, he realized now, was just another word for emptiness. And protection from pain meant protection from everything that made life worth living, connection, vulnerability, love. Love. The word struck him with the force of revelation. Was that what this was? This consuming awareness, this desperate need, this terror at the thought of losing her. He had loved once before, or thought he had, and that love had been rejected, traded for a better offer. He had sworn never to expose himself like that again. But Eleanor was not Catherine. Eleanor had stood beside him for 4 years, loyal and constant, seeing his flaws and choosing to remain anyway. Eleanor had cared for him. She had said as much, that terrible admission before she left. She had cared, and he had taken that precious gift and trampled it through his own emotional incompetence. Adrian turned from the window, his gaze falling on Eleanor's chair. Empty. Tomorrow it would still be empty. Next week, perhaps forever. Unless he could find some way to bridge the chasm he had created, unless he could overcome the pride and fear that had defined him for so long. He had begged her to stay. Begged. The Earl of Ashford, who never pleaded, who maintained his dignity above all else, had begged. And it had not been enough. Because words meant nothing without action, without proof, without the courage to risk everything for the possibility of something real. Adrian moved to his desk and withdrew a sheet of paper. His hand trembled as he picked up his pen. He did not know if Eleanor would read what he wrote. He did not know if anything he said could undo the damage he had inflicted. But he had to try. He owed her that much. Honesty, vulnerability, the truth he had been too cowardly to speak when she stood before him. He began to write, and the words came haltingly at first, then faster, as though some dam inside him had finally broken. He wrote of his past, of Catherine's betrayal and the walls he had built in response. He wrote of his blindness to Eleanor's presence, his gradual awakening to her importance, his jealousy and fear and confused longing. He wrote of his inadequacy, his inability to express feeling, his terror of offering his heart and having it judged insufficient once again. And finally, he wrote the truth that terrified him most, that somewhere in 4 years of proximity, somewhere between correspondence and conversation and shared silence, he had fallen in love with Eleanor Ashworth. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, inevitably, like watching dawn break over a landscape. You thought would remain forever dark. He loved her, her strength, her grace, her quiet dignity. He loved the way she listened, truly listened when he spoke. He loved her intelligence, her competence, her refusal to accept pity or charity. He loved that she had seen him, truly seen him, and had not turned away in disgust. He loved her, and he had realized it too late, and he did not know if love would be enough to overcome the wreckage of his pride. Adrian sealed the letter and sat back, exhausted. Tomorrow he would send it. Tomorrow he would lay himself bare and accept whatever judgment Eleanor rendered. Tonight, he would sit in this empty study and confront the possibility that he had destroyed the most valuable thing in his life through his own stubborn refusal to be vulnerable. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, London returning to its natural grey state. Adrian listened to it hammer against the windows and felt each drop like an accusation. He had stood beside Eleanor for years and never truly valued her presence. Now she was done trying, done waiting, done hoping for something he had been too broken to offer. And he was alone, surrounded by the cold comfort of his pride, wondering if this was how his life would end. Successful, respected, utterly empty of everything that mattered. Eleanor did not return on Friday. Adrian waited in his study until well past noon, the letter he had written remaining unsealed on his desk. Each time footsteps sounded in the hallway, his heart leapt with hope, only to plummet when they passed his door without pausing. By 2 o'clock he was forced to accept that she would not come. He sent the letter anyway, dispatching his most trusted footman with instructions to wait for a reply. The man returned 3 hours later with the letter unopened, refused at the door by Eleanor's elderly housekeeper. "The lady does not wish to receive correspondence from his lordship," the footman reported, his expression carefully neutral. "Her words, my lord, not mine." Adrian dismissed him and stood staring at the rejected letter, feeling the refusal like a knife between his ribs. She would not even read his words. The bridge he had hoped to build remained unconstructed, the chasm between them widening with each passing hour. The following week passed in a grey haze of routine disrupted and equilibrium shattered. Adrian's household continued to function, but barely. The correspondence piled up, unattended. Appointments were missed. Invitations went unanswered. His staff moved through the house with the nervous care of servants, aware their master's temper had become unpredictable. Adrian threw himself into parliamentary business, seeking distraction in debates over corn laws and railway legislation, but his concentration fractured repeatedly. He would find himself in mid-sentence during a speech and lose his train of thought entirely, Eleanor's face swimming before his eyes, the hurt in her expression during their final conversation, the tears she had tried to suppress, the weary resignation in her voice when she said she was done. Done. Such a simple word, such finality. Lord Thornbury appeared at White's one evening, looking insufferably pleased with himself. "Ashford, just the man I wanted to see. I must thank you for your secretary's direction. Miss Ashworth has been most gracious in receiving my calls. Delightful woman, quite captivating once you get past that serious exterior. I'm considering making a more formal declaration of my intentions." Adrian's hands clenched around his glass with sufficient force that he felt the crystal creak. "Are you indeed?" "Oh yes. She's precisely the sort of steady, sensible woman a man needs. Good family, despite the reduced circumstances. Attractive in a quiet way, and that mind." We spent an entire afternoon discussing Milton. I confess I hadn't thought much about Paradise Lost since university, but she made it seem positively fascinating. Each word was a blade twisting in Adrian's gut. He imagined Eleanor sitting with Thornbury, discussing literature, offering him the warmth of her attention, perhaps even smiling at him the way Adrian had seen her smile at the Bellinghams. He imagined Thornbury making his offer, Eleanor accepting the announcement in the papers. The Earl of Thornbury is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Eleanor Ashworth. The image made him physically ill. "If you'll excuse me," Adrian managed, setting down his glass with excessive care. "I have a pressing engagement." He left before Thornbury could respond, left before he said something unforgivable or did something violent. Outside, the November evening was bitter, a north wind carrying the promise of winter. Adrian walked without direction, letting the cold numb his face, his hands, hoping it might numb the ache in his chest as well. He found himself at the river eventually, standing on Westminster Bridge, watching the Thames flow black and relentless beneath him. The water looked cold, uninviting, rather like his life, he reflected bitterly. He had constructed such a careful existence, controlled, predictable, safe, and in one devastating week, it had all collapsed, revealing the emptiness at its core. Without Eleanor, his days lacked structure. Without her quiet presence, his study felt like a mausoleum. Without her steady voice reading through correspondence, without her intelligent questions and thoughtful observations, without the particular quality of silence that existed between them, his life felt fundamentally diminished. He had not realized how much space she occupied until that space was empty. Adrian remained on the bridge until the cold became unbearable, then walked home through streets that seemed hostile in their indifference. London continued around him, oblivious to his suffering. Carriages rattled past, link boys called out their services. The city's vast machinery of commerce and society and human, striving ground onward, uncaring that Adrian Harcourt's carefully ordered world had shattered. When he reached Ashford House, he found his butler hovering with an expression of suppressed anxiety. "My lord, a Mr. Ashworth called while you were out. Miss Eleanor's father. He left his card and said the matter was urgent. He asked that you call on him at your earliest convenience." Adrian's heart seized. "Did he say what the matter concerned?" "No, my lord. Only that it was urgent and concerned." "A Miss Eleanor." Adrian snatched the card from the silver salver. The address was in a modest district south of the river, farther than he had imagined Eleanor living. "Prepare the carriage, immediately." "My lord, it's quite late. Perhaps in the morning." "Now." The drive seemed interminable. Adrian's mind conjured a dozen catastrophes. Eleanor had fallen ill. Her father's condition had worsened. Thornbury had made his offer, and she had accepted, and her father wished to inform Adrian before the announcement. Each possibility was worse than the last, and all of them shared a common thread. Eleanor slipping further from his reach, the possibility of reconciliation receding with each passing hour. The lodgings, when they finally arrived, were respectable but modest. A narrow house on a quiet street, the kind of place where genteel poverty made its home. Adrian climbed the stairs, feeling profoundly out of place, his fine clothes and aristocratic bearing jarring against the worn carpet and faded wallpaper. An elderly housekeeper answered his knock, her expression wary until he presented his card. Then her manner shifted to anxious deference. "Lord Ashford, please come in. Mr. Ashworth is in the sitting room. He's been that worried, my lord. That worried." She led him to a small parlour, crowded with furniture too large for the space. Remnants, Adrian realised, of a better life, a country rectory where such pieces would have fit comfortably. A fire burned in the grate, inadequate, against the chill. And in a chair by the hearth sat an elderly man, thin and frail, a blanket across his lap despite the fire's warmth. "Lord Ashford," Mr. Ashworth said, his voice reedy but educated. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Please sit. We must speak about my daughter." Adrian sat on the edge of a sofa that had seen better days, his attention fixed on the old man. "Mr. Ashworth, if Eleanor is unwell, she is not ill precisely, but she is not well either." The old man's eyes, so like Eleanor's in their warm brown color, studied Adrian with uncomfortable penetration. "She has been unlike herself since Tuesday last. Quiet, withdrawn. She barely eats. She sits in her room for hours, staring at nothing. And yesterday, she informed me that she intends to accept a position as a companion to Lady Hartwell in Northumberland. She plans to leave London within the fortnight." The information struck Adrian like a physical blow. Northumberland, 300 miles away. She would leave. London entirely, put the maximum possible distance between herself and what? Him? The memories they shared? The pain he had inflicted? Did she say why? Adrian managed. She said there was nothing left for her here, that she needed a fresh beginning, a new situation. Mr. Ashworth leaned forward, his expression grave. "My lord, Eleanor has been devoted to your household for 4 years. She has never expressed dissatisfaction with the work. Indeed, she has spoken of you with—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "With a regard I found touchingly loyal, given the disparity in your stations. For her to suddenly seek employment 300 miles away, employment that would separate us when my health is so precarious, something has occurred. Something significant enough to drive my daughter to desperate measures." Adrian felt shame burn through him, hot and corrosive. "Mr. Ashworth, there was a misunderstanding between us. I said things that were hurtful. I allowed my own confusion to manifest as criticism of her choices. I tried to apologize, tried to explain, but Eleanor refused my letter. And now she is running away." The old man's voice was soft but unsparing. "From what, my lord? From embarrassment? From wounded pride? Or from something more significant?" The question hung between them, uncomfortably direct. Adrian found himself unable to meet the old man's gaze. "I don't know," he said finally. "Perhaps from all of those things, or perhaps from me. From feelings that I was too blind to recognize until the possibility of losing her made them impossible to ignore." Mr. Ashworth was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice held a different quality, understanding, perhaps, or sympathy. "You care for her." It was not a question. Adrian nodded slowly. "Yes, though I realized it far too late to matter." "Why too late?" "Because I have hurt her, Mr. Ashworth. Because I treated her with indifference for years. And then when I finally saw her clearly, I responded with possessive jealousy rather than honest regard. Because she deserves better than a man who is so emotionally damaged, he cannot express feeling without weaponizing it. And because," his voice cracked slightly, "because she is done trying." Those were her words. "Done waiting for something I was too broken to offer." Mr. Ashworth studied him with those penetrating eyes that were so eerily like Eleanor's. "My lord, may I speak plainly? Please. Eleanor has been in love with you for at least 2 years, perhaps longer. I am her father. I know my daughter's heart even when she tries to hide it. She has never said anything directly, of course. She is far too proper for such confession. But I have seen it in the way she speaks of you, in her careful defense of your character, when others in our social sphere have been less charitable. in the way her entire demeanor shifts on the mornings she prepares to come to your house. In the small considerations she extends, you that go far beyond her official duties. The word struck Adrian with devastating force. 2 years. While he had remained oblivious, caught in his comfortable routine, Eleanor had been carrying feelings for him. Hope, perhaps, or longing, patiently waiting for some sign of reciprocation that never came. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I never imagined." "Of course you didn't. Eleanor is skilled at concealing her feelings, particularly when she believes them hopeless. And why would she imagine otherwise? You are an earl, she is the daughter of a country clergyman. The disparity is considerable. She would never have presumed to hope for anything beyond your professional regard. But if she cared for me, why is she running now? Now, when I've finally realized, because hope deferred makes the heart sick, my lord," Mr. Ashworth said gently. "Eleanor has hoped quietly for 2 years, and then something changed. You saw her, truly saw her for the first time. She must have felt that shift. In your awareness, must have dared to believe that perhaps finally her regard might be returned. And then you responded with jealousy and criticism and possessive anger, rather than honest declaration. You hurt her precisely when she was most vulnerable, when her defenses were lowest. That is why she is running. Not from embarrassment, but from pain, from the unbearable agony of having her secret hope briefly acknowledged, then crushed." Adrian pressed his hands over his face, the full weight of his failure crushing down on him. He had not merely wounded Eleanor through carelessness, he had taken her hope, that precious, fragile thing she had nurtured in silence for years, and trampled it. No wonder she refused his letter. No wonder she fled at the very sight of correspondence from his hand. He had become, in that moment of cruel thoughtlessness, the author of her deepest hurt. "What can I do?" The question emerged broken, desperate. "Mr. Ashworth, please, tell me what I can do to repair this." The old man leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I cannot tell you what to do, my lord. That must come from your own heart. But I can tell you what Eleanor needs. She needs honesty without anger. She needs vulnerability without manipulation. She needs to know that your regard for her is not merely panic at losing something convenient or wounded pride at being rejected. She needs to know that you see her, truly see her, and that what you see is precious to you. That she is precious, not for what she does, but for who she is. She is." The words burst from Adrian, fervent and unguarded. "She is precious to me, Mr. Ashworth. She is—" He struggled to articulate what Eleanor had become in his awareness. "She is the still point in my chaotic world. She is intelligence and grace and quiet strength. She is the only person in years who has seen past my title and my position to the man beneath. She is—" He stopped, the truth rising to his lips unbidden. "She is everything I did not know I needed until I stood to lose her. And I love her. I am in love with her, not with her efficiency or her competence or her usefulness, but with her, Eleanor. The woman who speaks of rose gardens and church bells, the woman who has cared for you with such devotion, the woman who saw my brokenness and did not turn away." The confession hung in the small parlor, raw and exposed. Mr. Ashworth nodded slowly, as though Adrian had confirmed something he had already suspected. "Then you must tell her that, my lord. Not in a letter she will refuse, not through intermediaries or grand gestures that might be mistaken for manipulation. You must tell her, face to face, honestly, with no pride and no protection. You must risk yourself completely as she has risked herself these 2 years. You must be willing to hear her refuse you, to accept that you may have destroyed what might have been. And you must do it quickly, before she leaves for Northumberland and the separation becomes permanent. She won't see me. She refused my letter, refused any contact. She is here, my lord." Adrian's head snapped up. "What?" "In her room upstairs. I lied when I said she was out. I knew she would not agree to speak with you if she knew you were coming. So I summoned you, and I have kept you talking down here while she sits above, likely listening to every word through the heating vent." Mr. Ashworth smiled faintly. An old trick from her childhood. She used to eavesdrop on my conversations with parishioners, though she thought I never knew. Hope and terror surged through Adrian simultaneously. Eleanor was here now, perhaps listening. Perhaps she had heard everything he said to her father, the confession of love, the acknowledgement of his failure, the desperate desire to make amends. "What should I do?" "Go upstairs, my lord. Second door on the left. Knock. And when she refuses to open the door, which she will, speak to her anyway. Tell her everything. You just told me. Tell her why you were cruel on Tuesday, what fears drove your harshness. Tell her what she means to you, what you hope for, what you are willing to sacrifice or risk. And tell her that if, after hearing all of it, she still wishes to leave for Northumberland, you will let her go without impediment. But give her the honesty she deserves. Give her the vulnerability she has earned through her years of loyalty." Adrian rose, his legs unsteady. The stairs seemed impossibly steep, the distance to the second floor immense. But he climbed them, each step a choice to move toward vulnerability rather than retreat to safety. The second door on the left. He stood before it, his hand raised to knock, and felt his heart hammer against his ribs with force sufficient to cause pain. Behind this door was Eleanor. Behind this door was judgment, possible rejection, the risk of final, irreversible loss. Behind this door was also possibility, the slender chance that honesty and vulnerability might accomplish what pride and control could not. Adrian knocked softly. "Eleanor, it's Adrian. I know you don't wish to speak with me. I know I have no right to ask for your time or your attention, but I am asking anyway. Please, please let me explain. Please give me the chance to be honest with you in ways I should have been long ago." Silence, but not empty silence. He sensed her presence on the other side of the door, listening, perhaps struggling with her own desires and fears. "I love you," Adrian said quietly, speaking to the closed door to the woman beyond it. "I am in love with you, Eleanor Ashworth. I have been falling in love with you for weeks, perhaps months, without recognizing what was happening. And when I finally realized it, I responded with cruelty because I was terrified. Terrified of being vulnerable again. Terrified of offering my heart and having it rejected. Terrified that I had wasted 4 years being blind to the most valuable person in my life, and that I had realized the truth too late to matter." Still silence. But he thought he heard something, a soft sound, quickly suppressed. A sob, perhaps. Or simply his desperate imagination manufacturing hope where none existed. "I know I hurt you. I know my jealousy was possessive and unfair. I know I criticized your choices when I had no right to comment on your life beyond our professional arrangement. I know," his voice broke slightly, "I know that I took your hope, the hope your father says you've carried for 2 years, and I crushed it through my own emotional incompetence, and I am sorrier for that than I have words to express." Adrian pressed his hand against the door, as though he might reach through the wood and touch her. "You said you deserved to be seen. You were right. You deserve that and so much more. You deserve a man who recognizes your value from the beginning, who treasures every moment in your presence, who makes you feel cherished rather than tolerated. I cannot claim to be that man. I can only promise to become him if you give me the chance. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, to trust me one more time, I swear I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never doubt your importance to me." He waited, hope and dread warring in his chest, but the door remained closed, and Eleanor remained silent on the other side. "If you still wish to go to Northumberland," Adrian said finally, defeated, "I will not prevent you. Your father will want for nothing. I will ensure his care is the finest available, and your salary will continue whether you return to work or not. I owe your mother's memory that much, and I owe you far more. But Eleanor," his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "please don't go. Please don't leave without at least speaking to me, letting me see your face one more time. Please don't let our last interaction be that terrible scene in my study, with you in tears and me failing spectacularly to say what I needed to say." Silence. Final, devastating silence. Adrian lowered his head against the door, accepting defeat. She would not speak to him. She would leave for Northumberland, and he would spend the rest of his life haunted by the ghost of what might have been, the love he had failed to nurture, the woman he had failed to cherish, the happiness he had been too damaged and too proud to reach for when it stood beside him for 4 years. "I love you," he said one last time, and turned to leave. Behind him, he heard the soft click of a lock turning. Adrian froze mid-step, barely breathing. The door opened slowly, and there stood Eleanor, her face ravaged by tears, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by grief, and the sight of her pain he had caused, struck him with physical force. "You shouldn't have come," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse. "You shouldn't have said those things to my father. Shouldn't have stood outside my door making declarations that cannot possibly," her voice broke, "cannot possibly mean what they seem to mean." "They mean exactly what they seem to mean," Adrian said intently. "Eleanor, I love you. I am in love with you. Not with some idealized version, not with the competent secretary who makes my life easier, but with you. The woman who cares for her father with such devotion. The woman who maintained her dignity through circumstances that would have broken others. The woman whose quiet strength and grace have stood beside me for 4 years while I was too blind to appreciate the gift I had been given." Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "You don't love me. You think you do, because I threatened to leave, because your comfortable routine was disrupted. But in a few weeks, when the panic subsides, you'll realize you were mistaken. You'll come to resent the scandal, the whispers, the damage to your reputation. And I could not bear to have you look at me one day and realize I cost you everything." "You would not cost me anything that matters." Adrian moved closer, though he did not reach for her, respecting the distance she maintained. "Eleanor, do you know what I have? Vast estates I rarely visit. A seat in Parliament where I deliver speeches that change nothing. A title that opens doors to events I find tedious. Friendships that are alliances rather than genuine connections. A life that looks impressive from the outside but feels hollow at its core. What would I be, losing by loving you? Nothing. Nothing I would not gladly sacrifice for the possibility of something real, something true. Your family would disown you. Society would whisper that I entrapped you, that I... Let them whisper." Adrian's voice was fierce now, passionate. "Let my family rage. Let society ostracize us both. None of it matters, Eleanor. None of it has ever mattered. I have spent 7 years hiding from feeling, constructing walls to protect myself from hurt. And those walls have kept me safe, yes, but they've also kept me isolated, empty, half alive. You made me feel again. You made me care about something beyond duty and obligation. And I cannot go back to that hollow existence. Not now that I know what it means to love someone as I love you." Eleanor covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "You don't understand. I have loved you for so long. 2 years, your father said, but in truth it was longer. Almost from the beginning, I felt something. Admiration first, then respect, then something deeper. I told myself it was foolish, that you could never see me as anything but a convenience, and I made peace with that. I was content to simply be near you, to serve you, to be part of your life in whatever limited capacity I was permitted." She lowered her hands, her face anguished. "And then you started seeing me. I felt the shift in your attention, felt you watching me with new awareness. And hope, terrible, dangerous, hope began to grow. I thought perhaps finally you might care, and then you were cruel, possessive, critical. You took that fragile hope and destroyed it. Do you understand? You hurt me precisely when I was most vulnerable, when my defenses were lowest. How can I trust you now? How can I believe these declarations when last week you treated me like a misbehaving possession rather than a woman deserving of respect?" The accusation was devastating because it was entirely true. Adrian felt shame burn through him, but he forced himself to meet her gaze, to not look away from the pain in her eyes. "You're right. Everything you said is right. I behaved abominably. When I realized I had feelings for you, when Thornbury mentioned his interest, I panicked. Instead of being honest about what I felt, I lashed out. I tried to control you because I was terrified of the vulnerability that honesty would require. I hurt you because I was afraid, and there is no excuse for that. None." He took a shaky breath. 7 years ago, I loved a woman named Catherine, or I thought I loved her. I courted her, believed she returned my feelings, was prepared to offer marriage. Then she received a better offer from Lord Pemberton. His title was older, his fortune larger, and she accepted without hesitation. She told me to my face that one must be practical in these matters. as though my feelings were merely an inconvenient complication in her advancement, and I was humiliated, not just privately, but publicly, because everyone knew I had been courting her. Everyone saw me rejected for a superior offer. Eleanor's expression softened slightly, understanding beginning to dawn. My lord, after Catherine, I locked myself away emotionally. I swore I would never be vulnerable like that again, never offer my heart and risk having it judged insufficient. I took mistresses but never lovers. I maintained friendships but allowed no intimacy. For 7 years I have been safe, protected, utterly alone. And then you... His voice cracked. Then you slipped past every defense I had constructed. With your quiet competence, your lack of calculation, your genuine kindness. You made me care again, and it terrified me. When Thornbury expressed interest in you, all my old fears resurface. I saw history repeating, saw you choosing the man who could offer more, leaving me behind just as Catherine had. But I would never... I know that now. Your father helped me understand. You are nothing like Catherine. You have never calculated advantage, never sought to use me for advancement. You cared for me, God knows why, when I gave you nothing to encourage such feeling, and I responded to your loyalty, your years of devotion, with suspicion and possessive anger. I treated you as Catherine would have treated me, as an object to be managed rather than a person deserving of respect, and I am profoundly, desperately ashamed of that. Eleanor stood silent, tears still streaming down her face, her expression conflicted. Adrian felt his heart hammering, felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could send him away. She had every right to refuse him, to reject his explanations as too little, too late. He had hurt her too badly for words alone to repair the damage. "What are you asking of me?" Eleanor said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want, Adrian?" The sound of his name on her lips, without the formal "my lord," sent a shock of hope through his chest. "I am asking for a chance. Not for immediate forgiveness, not for you to forget my failures. I am asking for the opportunity to prove that my feelings are genuine, that my love is real and not some temporary confusion. I am asking you not to go to Northumberland, not to put 300 miles between us before we have explored what might be possible. And if I stay, what then? Then I court you, properly, openly, in defiance of society's expectations. I call on you here, take you to concerts and exhibitions, make my regard public. I introduce you to my family and dare them to object. I make it clear to everyone, to Thornbury, to the gossips, to all of London, that you are precious to me, that you are chosen, that any man who wishes to pursue you will have to go through me first." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips despite her tears. "That sounds suspiciously like the possessive jealousy you just apologized for." "Perhaps," Adrian admitted. "But there's a difference between possessive jealousy that seeks to control and protective devotion that seeks to honor. I don't want to control your choices, Eleanor. I want to be your choice. And if, after weeks or months of courtship, you decide I am not what you want, if you choose Thornbury or someone else, or if you simply choose independence, I will accept that. Painfully, but I will accept it. But please, give me the chance to show you who I can be when I'm not hiding behind walls of pride and fear." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, looking suddenly cold despite the fire burning downstairs. "I am frightened," she confessed softly. "Frightened that this will end badly, that you'll realize the price is too high, that I'll be left heartbroken and ruined, unable to return to employment because my reputation is destroyed. Frightened that even if you mean everything you're saying now, time and pressure from your family and society will erode your resolve. Frightened that I'll allow myself to hope again, and that hope will be crushed even more thoroughly than before." I know. Adrian longed to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and offer physical comfort, but he restrained himself. She needed space, needed time to process, needed to make this choice free from the pressure of his proximity. "I know you're frightened. I'm terrified too. But Eleanor, we can be frightened together. We can support each other through the difficulties ahead. You won't face society's censure alone. I'll be standing beside you, making it clear that their judgment means nothing compared to what we have." "What do we have?" Eleanor asked, and the question was genuine, searching. "We've never even had a conversation that wasn't about correspondence or estate management. We don't know each other, not really. You don't know my favorite books or how I take my tea or what I dream about when I cannot sleep. I don't know what makes you laugh or what you fear or why you stand at the window so often staring out at the rain. How can we build something real on such a fragile foundation? By doing exactly what you just described, learning those things about each other, talking, truly talking, about matters beyond estate management, discovering who we are when we're not constrained by the roles of employer and employee. Eleanor, yes, the foundation is fragile, but it's not non-existent. We have 4 years of shared history, of working together, of developing trust in each other's competence and character. That's more than many courtships begin with. We simply need time to build on that foundation, to transform professional respect into personal intimacy. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, more decided. If we do this, if I agree to let you court me, there must be boundaries, rules to protect us both. Hope surged through Adrian, sharp and painful. Anything. Name your terms. First, you must be certain, completely, absolutely certain that this is what you want, not what panic and fear of loss are making you think you want. Take a week, don't contact me, don't send letters, don't have your servants inquire after me. Sit with your feelings in silence and decide if what you're offering is real and lasting, or simply an emotional reaction to disruption. The thought of a week without seeing her, without contact, was agonizing. But Adrian recognized the wisdom in her request. Agreed. 1 week of silence to be certain. Second, if after that week you still wish to pursue courtship, you must be honest with your family immediately. I will not be your secret. If your mother's relatives or your aunts or whoever holds influence in your family objects, as they will, you must address that objection directly. I need to know you are prepared to defend your choice, not simply hope the problem resolves itself. I will write to my aunt, my father's sister, who serves as the family matriarch, as soon as the week concludes. I will inform her of my intentions and make clear that her approval, while valued, is not required. Third, Eleanor's voice wavered slightly. Third, you must understand that my heart is fragile right now. I have been hurt badly, not just last week, but through years of hoping for something that seemed impossible. If you realize this was a mistake, if you decide the cost is too high or that your feelings were temporary, you must tell me immediately. I would rather endure one clean break than months of slowly realized regret. Adrian stepped closer, unable to maintain distance any longer. Eleanor, I swear to you, on my honor, on my family name, on everything I hold sacred, if at any point I am uncertain, if I doubt my feelings or my commitment, I will tell you immediately and honestly. I will not string you along with false hope. I will not waste your time or your heart. You have my word. Eleanor searched his face, looking for something, sincerity perhaps, or the strength to trust again. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. 1 week then, 1 week for you to be certain, and if at the end of that week you still wish to court me, you may call on me here. We will begin as strangers, learning to know each other, not as employer and employee. We will see if what exists between us can survive outside the context of your study. And Northumberland? I will postpone my departure. I've already written to Lady Hartwell declining her offer, though I didn't post the letter. But I won't burn that bridge entirely until I'm certain there's a reason to remain in London. It was conditional, provisional, but it was hope. Eleanor was giving him a chance, and Adrian felt gratitude so intense it made his chest ache. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you for not giving up entirely, for allowing me the opportunity to prove myself. I know I don't deserve your generosity, but I swear I will do everything in my power to become worthy of it. Eleanor managed a small, sad smile. You've always been worthy, Adrian. You simply didn't believe it. And that lack of belief manifested as cruelty when you should have chosen vulnerability. If we are to have any hope of success, you must learn to trust me with your feelings. The difficult ones, the frightening ones, the ones that make you feel exposed. Can you do that? The question went to the heart of everything. His pride, his fear, his carefully constructed defenses. Could he lay himself bare before this? Woman, risk judgment, risk rejection, Risk the devastating pain of offering his authentic self and having it found wanting? I don't know, Adrian admitted, and the honesty of it felt like courage. I have spent 7 years protecting myself, and vulnerability does not come naturally to me. But I want to try, Eleanor. For you, for us, for the possibility of something real. I want to try. Will you help me? Will you be patient with my failures as I learn to be the man you deserve? I will try, Eleanor echoed softly. We will both try, and hope that our combined effort is sufficient. They stood in the narrow hallway outside her room, the space between them smaller now but still present. A physical manifestation of the caution they both felt, the wariness born of hurt and fear and years of carefully managed distance. Adrian longed to close that gap entirely, to pull Eleanor into his arms and hold her until the doubt in her eyes dissolved. But he restrained himself, recognizing that trust must be rebuilt slowly, earned rather than demanded. I should go, he said reluctantly. The week begins now, 7 days, and then I will call on you. And Eleanor, he paused, needing her to hear this. I already know the answer. I don't need a week to be certain. I'm doing this for you so you can trust that my declaration wasn't simply panic or impulse, but I am certain now, in this moment, standing in this hallway. I love you. That will not change in 7 days or 7 years. Eleanor's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she blinked them back. Go, Adrian, take your week, be certain, and then we'll see. Adrian descended the stairs slowly, pausing briefly to thank Mr. Ashworth, who sat by the fire with a knowing expression. The old man nodded, said nothing, but his eyes held approval mixed with warning. Don't hurt her again. That look said clearly. Next time there will be no reconciliation. Adrian understood. He would not get another chance. If he failed Eleanor. Again, if he allowed fear to manifest as cruelty or pride to supersede vulnerability, she would be gone. Not just from his employment, but from his life entirely. The stakes were absolute, the margin for error non-existent. In his carriage, rattling through London's dark streets, Adrian felt the strangest combination of emotions. Exhaustion from the emotional intensity of the evening, anxiety about the week ahead, but underneath it all, a tentative hope he had not felt in years. Eleanor had not sent him away permanently. She had given him a chance, had agreed to the possibility of courtship, had opened the door, literally and figuratively, when she could have kept it closed. That was something. That was everything. The week that followed was the longest of Adrian's life. He adhered strictly to Eleanor's requirement. No contact, no letters, no sending servants to inquire after her. He sat with his feelings, examining them from every angle, testing the certainty he had declared so. Confidently in that narrow hallway, he thought about the practical obstacles. His Aunt Margaret would be appalled by his choice. She had been angling for him to marry one of the Pemberton daughters, a match that would consolidate family alliances and increase the family's political influence. Society would whisper about Eleanor, would speculate that she had entrapped him, would judge her harshly for daring to reach above her station. Some doors would close, some invitations would be withdrawn. But when Adrian measured those losses against what he would gain, Eleanor's presence in his life, her intelligence and grace, the possibility of genuine partnership, the obstacles seemed trivial. He did not care about Aunt Margaret's approval or society's whispers. He cared about Eleanor, about building something real with her, about no longer living half a life defined by caution and fear. He thought about his past, about Catherine's rejection and the walls he had built in response. He examined whether his feelings for Eleanor were genuine or simply a reaction against that old hurt, proved to himself that he could love and be loved in return. But the more he considered it, the more certain he became. What he felt for Eleanor bore no resemblance to what he had felt for Catherine. With Catherine there had been passion, infatuation, the thrill of pursuit. With Eleanor there was something deeper, recognition perhaps, or the sense of having found something essential he hadn't known was missing. Eleanor completed him in ways Catherine never could have, filled spaces in his life he hadn't realized were empty. He attended his parliamentary duties, gave a speech on railway expansion that was well received, but felt utterly meaningless. He met with his stewards, reviewed accounts, fulfilled all his obligations, but the entire week felt like marking time, waiting for permission to begin the life he actually wanted to live. On the 7th day, Adrian woke before dawn, too restless to sleep. He dressed with unusual care, selecting the blue waistcoat Eleanor had noticed weeks ago. He breakfasted without appetite, then spent the morning staring at the clock, willing the hours to pass. Finally, at 3 o'clock, a proper time for social calls, he ordered his carriage and set out for Eleanor's lodgings. He carried flowers, not the elaborate hothouse arrangements favored by the ton, but simple blooms, roses and jasmine, white and pink, the kind that might have grown in a country rectory garden. His heart hammered as he climbed the familiar stairs. The elderly housekeeper answered his knock, her expression knowing and faintly amused. "She's been pacing for an hour, my lord, nervous as a cat. I'll tell her you're here." But before the housekeeper could move, Eleanor appeared in the doorway to the sitting room. She wore the blue dress again, the one that brought out her eyes, and her hair was arranged simply but beautifully. She looked scared and hopeful simultaneously, vulnerable in a way that made Adrian want to promise her the world. "Lord Ashford," she said formally, though her eyes betrayed her emotion. "Won't you come in?" Adrian entered the small sitting room, noting that Mr. Ashworth was conspicuously absent. Chaperonage observed through his presence upstairs, but privacy granted through his discretion. Adrian handed Eleanor the flowers, watching her expression soften as she recognized the simple beauty of them. "Roses," she said softly, touching the petals gently. "Like my father's garden in Hertfordshire. I remembered you mentioned them. I hoped—" Adrian paused, suddenly nervous. "I hoped they might please you." Eleanor set the flowers aside carefully and turned to face him directly. "Your week is complete, my lord. Are you certain?" "Completely, absolutely. Without reservation." Adrian moved closer, though still maintaining respectful distance. "Eleanor, I have spent 7 days examining my feelings from every possible angle. I've considered the obstacles, weighed the costs, measured my declaration against every doubt and fear. And I am certain. I love you. I want to court you openly, with the goal of marriage if you will have me. I want to build a life with you, face society's censure together, create something real and lasting. I am certain." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling now, genuinely smiling. "Then I suppose you may call me Eleanor without the formal Miss Ashworth, and I might occasionally call you Adrian rather than my lord, when we are private, of course." "Of course," Adrian echoed, and suddenly they were both laughing. Nervous, relieved laughter at the absurdity and wonder of this moment, this transformation from employer and secretary to potential partners, lovers, equals. "I don't know how to do this," Eleanor confessed. "I've never been properly courted. What do we do now?" "We talk," Adrian said simply. "We learn each other. You tell me about your childhood in Hertfordshire, about your mother and your father's parish. I tell you about Ashford Hall, about my family and my failures and my fears. We discover who we are beyond estate management and correspondence, and we see if what we've built in that study can survive and grow in the wider world." Eleanor nodded, settling into a chair and gesturing for Adrian to take the sofa opposite, and they began, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, to talk, really talk, for the first time in 4 years. They spoke of books and music, of childhood memories and secret dreams. Eleanor described her mother's death when she was 14, the way it had changed her father, made him more devout but also more withdrawn. Adrian spoke of his own mother's passing 3 years ago, the way grief had hollowed him out further, removing one of the few people he had allowed close. They discovered shared loves, Shakespeare, particularly the comedies, and long walks in the countryside, and the particular quality of light on summer evenings. They discovered differences too. Eleanor loved music and Adrian found most of it tedious. Adrian enjoyed political debate, while Eleanor found it frustratingly circular. But the differences felt surmountable, interesting rather than insurmountable. The afternoon slipped into evening. The housekeeper brought tea, which they drank while arguing amiably about whether Paradise Lost was Milton's masterpiece or merely his most ambitious failure. Eleanor quoted passages from memory, her face animated with intellectual excitement, and Adrian found himself mesmerized, not by the literary discussion, but by the woman before him, passionate and alive in ways she had never been in his study. When he finally rose to leave, well after the appropriate duration for a social call, Adrian felt as though he had been on a journey, from the careful formality of their professional relationship to something entirely new, something fragile but real. "May I call on you again tomorrow?" he asked at the door. "Yes," Eleanor said, and then more boldly, "Yes, Adrian, I would like that very much." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture both formal and intimate. Her fingers trembled slightly in his grasp, and he felt his own hand shaking with the force of the emotion he was barely containing. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for this chance, for your courage in trusting me again. I will not squander it, Eleanor. I promise you that." She squeezed his hand gently before withdrawing it. "I believe you. That's the terrifying part. I believe you. Now go, before my father decides he needs to investigate why the front door is still open." Adrian left, pausing at the bottom of the stairs to look back. Eleanor stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the lamplight from within, watching him. She raised one hand in a small wave, and Adrian felt his heart clench with the force of his love for her. 7 days ago, he had thought he had lost her forever. Today they had begun the cautious dance of courtship, of building trust, of exploring the possibility of a shared future. It was fragile, provisional, dependent on both of them choosing vulnerability over safety. But it was real. And for Adrian Harcourt, who had spent 7 years living a half-life defined by fear and isolation, real was everything. 3 weeks of courtship transformed Adrian's understanding of what love meant. Every afternoon, he called on Eleanor at her lodgings, where they sat in the modest parlor with Mr. Ashworth dozing discreetly in the corner, providing chaperonage, while granting them the illusion of privacy. They talked for hours about literature and politics, childhood memories and future dreams, the mundane details of daily life and the profound questions that shaped their worldviews. Adrian discovered that Eleanor sang beautifully, but was shy about it, that she had a sharp wit she had suppressed in his employ, that she harbored ambitions to write a novel. Someday, but doubted her abilities. Eleanor learned that Adrian's coldness masked profound loneliness, that his mother's death had devastated him in ways he had never allowed himself to grieve, that beneath his aristocratic reserve lived a man capable of surprising humor and unexpected gentleness. They attended concerts together, walked in the parks when weather permitted, visited galleries where Eleanor educated him about art movements he had never bothered to notice. Adrian made his intentions publicly clear. He was courting Eleanor Ashworth, and anyone who objected could take their censure elsewhere. The gossip was immediate and vicious. Whispers followed them through every public space. The secretary who seduced her employer, fortune hunter, scandal. Eleanor endured it with quiet dignity, though Adrian saw the cost in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly when she took his arm. He responded by being even more demonstratively attentive, making it clear, through every gesture and word, that Eleanor was precious to him, that their regard was mutual, that she had nothing to be ashamed of. Lord Thornbury, when he encountered them at the theatre, was coldly furious. "Ashford, I see you've poached my prospect. How very sporting of you." "Miss Ashworth was never your prospect," Adrian replied evenly. "She is her own woman, capable of making her own choices. She chose me, and I count myself extraordinarily fortunate." Thornbury sneered. "For now, perhaps. But when the novelty wears off and you realize the price you're paying, the doors that close, the connections you lose, you'll come to resent her. And then where will she be? Ruined, unmarriageable, unable to return to respectable employment." Adrian felt rage surge through him, but Eleanor's hand on his arm steadied him. "My lord," she said quietly to Thornbury, "you underestimate both my resilience and Lord Ashford's integrity, but your concern, however misguided, is noted." She steered Adrian away before the confrontation could escalate, but the encounter troubled her. That evening, in the privacy of her sitting room, she voiced the fears Thornbury had articulated. "What if he's right?" Eleanor asked quietly. "What if, in 6 months or a year, you wake up and realize this cost you too much? You've had letters from your aunt, I know. She's expressed her disapproval. Your political allies are concerned about the scandal affecting your standing. Your friends are divided. All of this turmoil because you chose to court me. How can I not worry that eventually you'll regret that choice?" Adrian had been dreading this conversation, knowing it would eventually come. He set down his teacup and moved to kneel before Eleanor's chair, taking her hands in his. "Look at me, Eleanor, please." She raised her eyes to meet his, and he saw the fear there, the vulnerability she tried so hard to conceal. "I need to tell you something," Adrian said. "Something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew how damaged I truly was, how profoundly Catherine's betrayal affected me, you would realize I was not worth the risk." Eleanor's brow furrowed with concern. "Adrian, no, let me say this. I need you to understand." He took a deep breath, ordering his thoughts. 7 years ago, Catherine rejected me for a better offer. The humiliation was profound, but worse was the lesson I took from it, that love was worthless, that feelings could be traded like commodities, that opening your heart only invited pain. I locked myself away after that. I swore I would never be vulnerable again, and for 7 years I succeeded. I was safe, protected, utterly alone. He squeezed her hands gently. "Then you entered my life. You stood beside me for 4 years and I barely saw you. But gradually, without my noticing, you slipped past every defense I had constructed. You made me care again, Eleanor. You made me want to be more than the cold, controlled man I had become. And that terrified me because caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of being hurt again." "I know," Eleanor said softly. "You've explained this. But what I haven't explained is what happened when I finally allowed myself to love you, when I stopped fighting it and admitted the truth to myself." Adrian's voice grew intense, passionate. "Everything changed, Eleanor. The things I thought mattered, my aunt's approval, society's acceptance, my political standing, all of it became trivial compared to the possibility of building a life with you. Not because those things ceased to have value, but because you matter more, infinitely more." He rose slightly, cupping her face in his hands. "You asked what if I wake up one day and regret this choice. Eleanor, I can promise you with absolute certainty that will never happen, because choosing you was not a sacrifice, it was liberation. Loving you freed me from the prison I had built for myself. Yes, there are costs, doors that close, relationships that strain, gossip that stings. But what I have gained is so much greater. I have gained you, your intelligence, your grace, your courage, your love. I have gained the possibility of genuine happiness, of partnership, of building something real rather than maintaining an impressive facade of a life." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face now, but she was smiling through them. "Adrian, I love you," he said, the words coming easily now, naturally. No longer trapped behind walls of pride and fear. "I love you with an intensity that still surprises me. I love the way your mind works, the way you challenge me intellectually, the way you see through my defenses to the man beneath. I love your loyalty to your father, your quiet strength, your refusal to accept pity or charity. I love that you sing when you think no one is listening, that you get passionate about books, that you find joy in simple pleasures like roses and church bells. I love everything about you, Eleanor Ashworth, and that love is not diminished by society's censure. If anything, it grows stronger every time we face their judgment together and choose each other anyway." Eleanor pulled his hands from her face, holding them tightly. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you for so long. Through all those years when I thought it was hopeless, when I believed you would never see me. I love you even though you hurt me, because I understand why you did. I love you. Because beneath the coldness and pride, you are capable of such profound feeling, such loyalty, such devotion. I love you because you make me want to be braver, to believe that happiness is possible even when circumstances seem impossible." Adrian felt something break open in his chest, not pain but the opposite, a rush of joy so intense it was almost overwhelming. "Then marry me," he said, the words emerging before he had consciously decided to speak them. "Marry me, Eleanor. Not someday, not after society adjusts or my family comes around. Marry me soon. Be my wife, my partner, the person I build my life around. Marry me and let us face the world together, as equals, as partners who chose each other despite every obstacle." Eleanor's eyes widened with shock. "Adrian, we've only been courting 3 weeks. People will say, let them say whatever they wish. I don't need more time to be certain. I've wasted enough time already. 7 years hiding from feeling, 4 years blind to your Presents? Weeks of painful separation when I should have declared myself from the beginning. I'm done wasting time, Eleanor. I want to marry you. I want to wake beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want children with you, a life with you, decades of partnership and love and genuine connection. So I'm asking you here and now, will you marry me? Eleanor laughed through her tears, the sound joyful and disbelieving simultaneously. Yes, she said. Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. Despite the scandal, despite the obstacles, despite every reason this seems imprudent, yes, because I love you, and I would rather face the world's censure with you than live safely without you. Adrian pulled her from her chair and into his arms, propriety abandoned entirely in the face of overwhelming emotion. He held her tightly, feeling her shake with sobs against his chest, his own eyes burning with tears he had not shed in 7 years. Mr. Ashworth coughed meaningfully from his corner, reminding them of his presence, but Adrian did not immediately release her. He simply held Eleanor, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms, marveling that this woman, this extraordinary woman, had chosen him despite everything. When he finally loosened his embrace enough to look at her face, he found Eleanor smiling at him with such radiant happiness that he felt his breath catch. Without thinking, without asking permission, he lowered his head and kissed her, softly at first, tentatively, then more deeply as she responded, her hands coming up to thread through his hair, holding him close. It was their first kiss, and it felt like a promise, like sealing a vow. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Mr. Ashworth was chuckling from his corner. "About time, I must say," the old man said, his eyes twinkling. "I was beginning to think you'd never get around to it, my lord. Eleanor's been ready to say yes since the 2nd week of courtship, though she'd have died rather than admit it." "Papa!" Eleanor blushed furiously, but she was laughing. Adrian grinned, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Then I should have proposed sooner and spared us all the suspense." He sobered slightly, turning to face Mr. Ashworth directly. "Sir, I should formally ask your blessing. I know I'm not the match you might have hoped for your daughter." "Nonsense," Mr. Ashworth interrupted. "You're exactly the match I hoped for. A man of honor and integrity who loves Eleanor for herself, not for advantage or convenience. A man capable of growth, of overcoming his own fears and failures, to choose vulnerability and connection. You'll do very well, my lord. You have my blessing and my gratitude for making my daughter happy." The words, spoken with simple sincerity, affected Adrian more than he had anticipated. He felt a tightness in his throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you," he managed. "I promise you, I will spend my life ensuring she never regrets this choice." "See that you do," Mr. Ashworth said, but his voice was warm, approving. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of happiness and practicalities. They discussed wedding plans. Eleanor wanted something simple, private, as soon as could be arranged. Adrian agreed immediately, having no desire for the elaborate society wedding that would turn their marriage into a spectacle. They would marry by special license in 3 weeks at Mr. Ashworth's former church in Hertfordshire, if the current vicar would allow it. A small ceremony attended only by those who truly cared for them, free from the judgmental eyes of the ton. When Adrian finally departed, well past the appropriate hour, he felt as though he were walking on air. He had proposed. Eleanor had accepted. In 3 weeks, she would be his wife. The reality of it seemed almost too wonderful to believe. But the following morning brought complications. A letter arrived from Aunt Margaret, written in a hand shaking with fury. She had heard rumors of an impending engagement and demanded he present himself at her house immediately to explain this catastrophic lapse in judgment. Adrian went, out of respect for her position as family matriarch, but with no intention of altering his course. His aunt received him in her drawing room, her elderly face rigid with disapproval. "I am told you intend to marry your secretary. Please tell me the gossips are mistaken." "They are not mistaken." "Aunt, I am engaged to Miss Eleanor Ashworth. We will marry in 3 weeks." The silence that followed was terrible. Aunt Margaret stared at him as though he had announced plans to join a traveling circus. "You cannot be serious. Adrian, think of your position, your family, your political career." "I have thought of all those things. They matter less than Eleanor. She is a nobody, The daughter of a country clergyman, without fortune or connections, employed in your household as staff. The scandal will be immense. You will be ostracized. Your political allies will abandon you. The family name will be tarnished. Then the family name was already tarnished by valuing appearance over substance. Adrian's voice remained calm but firm. Aunt Margaret, I respect your concern, but my decision is made. I love Eleanor. She is a woman of excellent family, impeccable character, and considerable intelligence. Her father is a clergyman, which is an honorable profession. Her circumstances are reduced, but that is not a moral failing. And as for her employment in my household, she served with dignity and competence, asking nothing beyond fair compensation for honest labor. I see nothing there to be ashamed of. You see nothing, his aunt sputtered, temporarily speechless with rage. Adrian, if you do this, if you insist on this appalling mesalliance, there will be consequences. I will not support you. Your cousins will not receive her. Half of London will cut you both socially. Then half of London is not worth knowing. Adrian rose, the interview clearly concluded. Aunt Margaret, I had hoped for your blessing, but I do not require it. I am marrying Eleanor with or without the family's approval. I would prefer to have your support, to know that when you meet her, you will see what I see, an extraordinary woman worthy of respect and affection. But if that is not possible, so be it. I choose Eleanor over your approval, over society's acceptance, over every obstacle you might place in our path. I choose her, and that choice is final. He left his aunt's house feeling shaken but resolute. The confrontation had been as bad as anticipated, but he had held firm. Eleanor mattered more than family approval, more than anything. But when he arrived at Eleanor's lodgings for their afternoon visit, he found her in distress. She had received a letter that morning, unsigned but clearly from someone in society, warning her that marrying Adrian would destroy him. The letter detailed every consequence of their union, the political doors that would close, the family relationships that would fracture, the social invitations that would cease. It painted a devastating picture of Adrian's future, a future ruined by his association with a woman so far beneath his station. What if they're right? Eleanor asked, the letter trembling in her hands. What if I am ruining your life? Perhaps we should wait, give society time to adjust, allow your family to reconcile. Themselves? No. Adrian took the letter from her hands and threw it into the fire without reading it. No, Eleanor. We are not delaying because anonymous cowards send poison in the post. We are not allowing society or my family to dictate our timeline. I have already lost 7 years to fear and isolation. I will not lose any more. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands. Listen to me. Every word in that letter is likely true. There will be consequences to our marriage. Doors will close. Relationships will strain. My political career may suffer. But none of that matters because the life I would have without you, the respectable, acceptable, approved life, would be empty. It would be returning to the prison I escaped from. I would rather face every consequence they threaten with you beside me than live comfortably and alone without you. But your family? My family will adjust or they won't. I love my aunt, but I don't require her approval to live my life. The same is true of my cousins, my distant relatives, anyone who values propriety over happiness. Eleanor, you are not ruining my life. You are saving it. You are giving me a reason to care about something beyond duty and obligation. You are offering me partnership, love, genuine connection. How could that possibly be ruin? Eleanor searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. You're certain, truly certain, because if we do this, there's no going back. Once we marry, the scandal will be permanent. You cannot change your mind later without destroying us both. I am certain, Adrian said intensely. I have never been more certain of anything. Eleanor, I love you. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. And I don't give a damn what society thinks about it. She smiled then, tentative but genuine. Then we should probably discuss where we'll live after the wedding, because I doubt your household staff is prepared to accept me as their mistress after 4 years of me being merely the secretary. Adrian laughed, tension breaking. We'll go to Ashford Hall in Derbyshire. It's beautiful there, rolling countryside, gardens that will remind you of your father's rectory. We'll settle there, away from London's gossip, and build our life in peace. And when we do return to London, we'll face society together, united. They can whisper all they like. We won't be moved. They spent the afternoon making plans, practical arrangements for the wedding, discussions about how to blend their households, decisions about when to inform Adrian's staff. But beneath the practicalities lay a deep current of joy, the giddy happiness of two people who had chosen each other despite every obstacle, who had found love in the most unexpected place. As Adrian prepared to leave that evening, Eleanor walked him to the door. They lingered there, reluctant to part, her hand in his. 3 weeks, Eleanor said softly. In 3 weeks, I'll be your wife. It seems impossible. It seems inevitable, Adrian corrected, as though everything in my life was leading to this moment, this choice, as though I was always meant to find you, eventually. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, Eleanor, for standing beside me all those years when I couldn't see you, for having the courage to walk away when I hurt you, for being brave enough to give me a second chance, for choosing me despite every reason not to. Thank you. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears. Thank you for finally seeing me, for being willing to risk everything for us, for loving me enough to face the consequences. She paused, then added with a small smile, and thank you for being persistent. If you had given up after I refused your letter, if you hadn't come here and stood outside my door declaring yourself, we would have lost this. We would have lost each other. I would never have given up, Adrian said fiercely. I would have stood outside that door every day if necessary. I would have written letters until you read them. I would have found a way, Eleanor, because losing you was not an option I could accept. They kissed again, long and sweet, a promise of the intimacy that would soon be theirs by right. When they finally parted, Adrian forced himself to walk away, though every instinct urged him to stay, to hold Eleanor and never let go. 3 weeks felt like an eternity. The wedding took place on a grey December morning in Hertfordshire, at the small country church where Mr. Ashworth had served for 30 years. The current vicar, who had known Eleanor since childhood, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. The congregation was small. Mr. Ashworth, Adrian's man of affairs, who served as witness, the housekeeper who had cared for Eleanor and her father, and a handful of village folk who remembered the Ashworth family with affection. It was not the grand society wedding Adrian's position might have demanded. There were no noble guests, no elaborate decorations, no wedding breakfast attended by hundreds. But as Adrian stood at the altar watching Eleanor walk toward him on her father's arm, he felt only gratitude for the simplicity, the intimacy, the complete lack of pretense. Eleanor wore a simple gown of ivory silk, unadorned except for a spray of white roses in her hair, roses from her father's former garden, carefully preserved by the current occupants of the rectory. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fashion or ostentation, and everything to do with the joy illuminating her face, the love shining in her eyes as she met Adrian's gaze. The ceremony was brief, traditional. Adrian spoke his vows clearly, his voice steady with conviction. Eleanor's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but she too spoke firmly, committing herself to this union they had chosen despite every obstacle. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Adrian kissed Eleanor with tender reverence, mindful of their small audience, but unable to restrain his joy entirely. They were married. Eleanor was his wife. After years of loneliness, months of confusion, weeks of courtship, they were finally, irrevocably united. They left the church to find snow beginning to fall, soft flakes drifting down to blanket the countryside in white. Adrian handed Eleanor into the carriage that would carry them to Ashford Hall, then climbed in beside her. As they pulled away from the church, Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, and Adrian wrapped, his arm around her, holding her close. "No regrets?" Eleanor asked softly. "None," Adrian replied with complete honesty. "You?" "None. Though I confess I'm nervous about arriving at Ashford Hall as its mistress. Your staff must be in shock." Adrian chuckled. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, is a supremely practical woman. When I informed her of our engagement, she simply asked whether you would want to redecorate the mistress's chambers or prefer them as they are. I believe she's more concerned with efficient household management than the scandal of my choice in wives. That's reassuring, at least." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. watching the countryside transform under its blanket of snow. Then Eleanor stirred, sitting up slightly to look at Adrian directly. "I want you to know something," she said. "I understand that these weeks and months ahead will be difficult, that society will continue to judge us, that your family may not reconcile themselves to our marriage, that there will be costs to this choice we've made. But Adrian, I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever we face, I will never regret this. Never regret choosing you, choosing us. You are worth every consequence." Adrian felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And you are worth everything I might have lost. Eleanor, I spent 7 years living a half-life, telling myself I was content with respectability and duty, but I wasn't living, not really. I was merely existing. You gave me back my life. You gave me a reason to care, to feel, to be fully human rather than just going through the motions. How could I possibly regret that?" He pulled her close again, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We chose each other, Eleanor. We chose love over propriety, partnership over comfort, vulnerability over safety. And that choice, that brave, difficult, wonderful choice, is the only thing that truly matters. Everything else is just noise." Eleanor smiled against his chest. "When did you become such a philosopher, my lord? When I married a woman intelligent enough to make me think more deeply about what actually matters in life." He paused, then added with mock seriousness, "Also, I should mention, you'll have to stop calling me my lord now. We're married. Adrian will suffice." "Old habits," Eleanor murmured. "Give me time. 4 years of my lord don't disappear overnight." "We have time," Adrian said contentedly. "We have all the time in the world." They arrived at Ashford Hall as dusk settled over the Derbyshire countryside. The house blazed with lights, welcoming them home. Mrs. Davies met them at the entrance with a curtsy that treated Eleanor with all the deference due the mistress of the house. If she harbored any reservations about the former secretary becoming her employer, she concealed them perfectly, behind professional courtesy. Adrian led Eleanor through the house, showing her rooms she had never seen during her years managing his correspondence from London. He showed her the library with its thousands of volumes, the music room with its pianoforte, the conservatory where winter roses bloomed despite the cold. But most importantly, he showed her the mistress's chambers, spacious rooms overlooking the gardens, decorated in soft blues and creams. "These were my mother's rooms," Adrian said quietly. "They've stood empty since her death, but I've had them prepared for you. If you dislike them, if you prefer something else, we can change everything." "They're perfect," Eleanor interrupted, running her hand along the mantelpiece, taking in the elegant furnishings, the warmth of the fire someone had thoughtfully lit. "Adrian, they're beautiful. I'm honored to occupy your mother's rooms." "She would have liked you," Adrian said, and realized as he spoke that it was true. His mother had possessed Eleanor's same quiet strength, her dignity, her refusal to be defined by society's expectations. "She would have understood why I chose you, even if the rest of the family doesn't." That night, after the household had retired and they were finally blessedly alone, Adrian and Eleanor stood together in the mistress's chambers, suddenly shy despite the intimacy of their situation. Eleanor had dismissed the lady's maid Adrian had hired, preferring to undress herself. Now she sat at the vanity in her nightgown, brushing her hair with slow, meditative strokes. Adrian watched her from where he stood by the fire, still dressed in his shirt and breeches, transfixed by the simple domesticity of the moment. This woman was his wife. This was his life now, not the cold, empty existence he had maintained for 7 years, but something warm and real and infinitely precious. "You're staring," Eleanor said, meeting his eyes in the mirror with a small smile. "I'm appreciating," Adrian corrected, moving to stand behind her. He took the brush from her hand and continued the motion, running it through her chestnut hair with careful reverence. "I'm marveling at my extraordinary good fortune. I'm thinking about how close I came to losing this, to never knowing what it felt like to belong to someone and have them belong to me." Eleanor turned on the bench to face him, taking his free hand in hers. "You didn't lose me. We found each other eventually. Perhaps not in the way either of us expected, perhaps later than we might have wished, but we found each other, Adrian. And now we have the rest of our lives to build something beautiful." Together. Adrian set down the brush and cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. I love you, Eleanor Harcourt. I love you with everything I am, everything I have, everything I will ever be. And I promise you, I will spend every day of our marriage ensuring you never doubt that love, never regret your choice, never feel anything less than cherished. I love you too, Eleanor whispered, my proud, wounded, complicated Earl, who somehow learned to be vulnerable enough to let me in. I love all of you, the easy parts and the difficult parts, the strength and the scars. I love the man you are and the man you're becoming, and I will stand beside you as I have done for years, but now as your wife, your partner, your equal, always. They kissed, tender at first, then deepening as years of suppressed longing finally found expression. Adrian lifted Eleanor into his arms, carrying her to the bed they would share, the bed where they would begin the physical expression of the emotional bond they had forged through months of patient courtship and years of unconscious preparation. And later, lying tangled together in the darkness, Eleanor's head pillowed on Adrian's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, they both felt the peace of having finally irrevocably chosen correctly. They had chosen each other over propriety, love over safety, partnership over pride. They had chosen vulnerability, chosen honesty, chosen the difficult path of building something real rather than maintaining impressive facades. Society would continue to judge them. Adrian's family would likely remain disapproving. There would be costs to this choice, consequences they would face together in the months and years ahead. But in that moment, in the quiet intimacy of their wedding night, none of it mattered. They had each other. They had love. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Outside, snow continued to fall over Derbyshire, blanketing the countryside in silence. Inside Ashford Hall, the Earl and his new Countess slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had spent years standing beside each other before finally realizing they were meant to stand together. A lord who had been too blind to see what stood before him for years. A woman who had stood beside him patiently, loving him in silence, until finally saying she was done trying. And a love that bloomed precisely when he begged her to stay, when he finally devastatingly understood what he stood to lose. It was not the romantic story society might have preferred, no grand gestures, no dramatic rescues, no effortless falling into love. Instead, it was something better, something real. Two broken people choosing to be vulnerable with each other, choosing to build something genuine rather than maintain safe facades, choosing each other despite every obstacle and consequence. And in the end, that choice, that brave, difficult, wonderful choice was the only thing that truly mattered.